the clash of civilizations, the fate of the Western world, the echoes of war that still reverberate through time. In the golden age of Greece, as philosophers pondered the cosmos and poets sang of heroes, a storm was brewing on the horizon. The mighty Persian Empire, a colossus stretching from the shores of the Aegean to the mountains of Central Asia, cast its gaze westward. But in its path stood a people unlike any other, the fiercely independent Greeks. This is a story of valor, betrayal, and fate. Of Spartan warriors standing unshaken against impossible odds. Of Athenians forging an empire on the waves. Of a war that reshaped the course of history. From the burning temples of Sardis to the blood-soaked plains of Marathon. From the mountain pass of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans made their final stand, to the rolling seas of Salamis, where triremes clashed in a battle that would decide the future of democracy itself. This was more than just war. It was a battle for identity, for freedom, for the right to choose one's destiny. And in the pages of history, one man stood as its chronicler, the father of history himself, Herodotus. His words, carved into time, offer us a window into this legendary conflict. This is the story of the Greek and Persian wars. The rise of an empire, the defiance of a people, and the echoes of battle that still whisper through the ruins of the ancient world. Prepare to witness history unfold like never before. The allure of the Greek and Persian wars lies in their significant impact on the Western world's history. The Athenians, Spartans, and other Greeks facilitated the autonomous development of their distinctive and profoundly important culture. Free from Persian hegemony, by thwarting the Persian conquest of Greece. Equally significant is the recounting of the Persian Wars in one of the most pivotal and influential texts of classical Greek literature, the Histories of Herodotus. Herodotus's oeuvre offers a comprehensive narrative of the Persian Wars and signifies the inception of historical investigation and the establishment of history as a scholarly discipline. Herodotus was born in the early 5th century BC in the Greek city of Halikarnassos, located on the periphery of the Persian Empire. He journeyed far, gathering information about himself and his forebears from individuals. He could converse with numerous individuals who had witnessed the events or received first-hand testimonies from other participants. Consequently, the Peloponnesian Wars were the first conflicts documented by an oratorical narrative, by an individual capable of acquiring precise and credible information. Herodotus's narrative can be partially augmented by additional sources, such as subsequent Greek and Latin authors and the official records of Athens and Persia, but he remains the most pivotal source. The concept of documenting remarkable accomplishments for future generations was not novel. Egypt, Babylonia, and Assyria had sovereigns who erected monuments to commemorate their grandeur and adorned them with official ceremonies. Herodotus's work is distinctive because he aimed not only to compile records, but also to investigate their origins and the reasons behind their occurrence. He deliberately attempted to elucidate the events that transpired. Thus, Herodotus is integral to a broader intellectual and cultural legacy of philosophical and scientific exploration and inquiry. Learning from occurrences is also a component of the process. Herodotus presents his inquiries into the origins and causes of the events he recounts, along with his assessments of their broader significance. He encourages his readers to derive insights from his histories, even though parts of his teachings may appear peculiar to contemporary audiences. This is his account introduction. These are the inquiries, derived from the Greek term histories, of Herodotus of Halicarnassos, documented to preserve the memory of the actions of these individuals, to ensure that the remarkable accomplishments of the Greeks and Persians retain their deserved renown, and to chronicle the reasons for their conflict. It is essential to recognize that when Herodotus employs the Greek term barbaroi to describe the Persians, he does not intend it as a pejorative. In ancient Greece, barbaroi referred to foreigners and lacked the pejorative connotations it possesses today. The initiative for the entire expedition likely originated with the Persians, while the exiled Naxian aristocrats' petition to Aristodemus served as a pretext for the assault. Aristodemus has committed to covering a significant portion of the expedition's expenses, likely expecting to recover his investment through the spoils of Naxos. The crew for the fleet of 200 trireme warships primarily originated from the Greek cities of Asia Minor. However, the army comprised many Persian soldiers and was led by Megabates, a relative of the great king. Upon the arrival of the invasion force at Naxos, the residents were prepared. They likely learned of the enormous preparations, especially the fleet gathering, from maritime traders passing between the Cyclades and the mainland. Their population and supply were consolidated in the fortified city of Naxos, which endured a 4-month siege. Upon depleting their supplies, the Persians capitulated, and their men withdrew to the mainland city of Mycale. Aristodemus resolved to instigate a comprehensive insurrection of the Ionian Greeks against the Persians at this juncture. His reasons are challenging to ascertain. Herodotus implies that he opposed Megabates, the Persian commander. Nevertheless, it is improbable that their discord sprang from Megabates' maltreatment of an Ionian naval captain named Skylax. Aristodemus had financed the unsuccessful voyage, and now he, or more accurately, the city of Miletos, could not bear the expense. Like numerous other Greek cities, Miletos was evolving into a center of political unrest. The rulers, supported by Persia, were largely unpopular among the populace, who desired increased influence in the governance of their towns. Aristodemus resolved to present himself as the leader of a revolution. A reform movement in Ionia sought to eliminate Persian domination, ousting dictators, and establish governments founded on the principle of isonomia, equal rights, for all citizens. Aristodemus announced his resignation as Miletos' tyrant. However, he continued to be the preeminent political figure. Aristodemus organized the expulsion of the tyrants from the principal Ionian cities and islands, such as Erythrae, Teos, Samos, and Chios. The majority proceeded to Sardis, where they allied with the satrap Artaphernes' retinue, anticipating their Persian benefactor's reinstatement. The recently emancipated Ionian populace appointed their generals for the forthcoming military engagement with the Persians. The fervor with which the Ionians heeded Aristodemus' appeal for insurrection was partially attributable to the despotic character of Persian governance. It is not to imply that the tyrants or the Persian satraps who designated them were unduly oppressive in their governance of the Greeks. However, the Ionians, evidently harbored resentment towards being subjected to rulers chosen from among their compatriots, at the discretion of a distant king whose interests seldom aligned with their own. Several Ionian cities and islands were cultivating democratic governance before Persian domination. The Ionian Greeks, culturally and politically separate from the mainland Greeks, faced mounting challenges in aligning their desires for self-governance with the requirements of the Persian Empire. These trends persisted in mainland Greece, particularly in Athens, but the transition to extensive popular involvement in governance was prematurely interrupted in Ionia. King Darius, referred to by the Greeks as the craftsman, required a labor force for military campaigns and imposed a monetary tribute, paid in silver at an elevated rate compared to prior assessments. The campaigns targeted groups such as the Scythians, whom the Greeks did not perceive as a danger to their territories, while the silver was either accumulated in far Persia or expended on tributes and salaries for other foreigners. The Ionians received minimal benefits from their annexation by the Persians. Archaeological research has shown that their participation in Mediterranean marine trade was diminishing by the late 6th century. They may have perceived that the towns of mainland Greece, Italy, Sicily, and the Phoenicians were thriving at their expense and needed liberation from Persian dominance to restore their economic success. The Ionians were astute enough to recognize that they could not liberate themselves from Persian domination without external support, prompting them to seek aid from their kin in mainland Greece. Aristodemus journeyed to Sparta to solicit assistance from the most powerful Greek city-states, but was unsuccessful. The Spartans were excessively absorbed with domestic issues, notably a protracted rivalry with the city of Argos, to dispatch an army abroad. The Argives had recently received a grave oracular warning from the sanctuary of Apollo in Delphi, predicting their imminent destruction and that of Miletos. Hence, they were reluctant to assist. Aristodemus likely solicited various prominent Greek states with comparable outcomes. However, he succeeded in convincing Athens and the Euboean city of Eretria to dispatch a contingent of warships. What motivated the Athenians and Eretrians to assist the Ionians while the Spartans and others declined? A heightened sense of camaraderie with the Ionians may have been one rationale. They communicated in largely the same Greek dialect. Their religious festivals exhibited significant similarities, and they believed in a shared lineage. It is thought that the Greeks who established settlements in Ionia initially travelled across the Aegean Sea from Athens. Before the arrival of the Persians, they maintained strong diplomatic and economic relations, and now had a mutual desire for democratic governance. The Athenians had formally allied with the Persian satrap Artemisium to secure his support in conflicts with other Greek kingdoms. However, they no longer honoured this pact due to the Persians harbouring Hippias, the former ruler of Athens, at Sogdion. Hippias sought to reclaim authority in Athens with the assistance of Persia. Aristodemus depicted the Persians to the Athenian assembly as militarily vulnerable and susceptible to exploitation by a united Greek contingent. The Athenians resolved to dispatch a military expedition with 20 ships, commanded by Melanthios, to assist the Ionians in their conflict against the Persians. Herodotus observes that the ships involved in the wars of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were the source of conflict between the Greeks and Persians. The Athenians and Eretrians, who dispatched 5 warships to support the rebels, may have deterred the Persians from further westward advance. They were likely cognizant of their susceptibility to assault in the case of a Persian invasion of the Cyclades. In 498, the Athenian and Eretrian forces allied with a predominantly Milesian army at Ephesus. The united force advanced inland to assault the Persian provincial capital of Sardis. They ambushed the satrap Artaphernes. He forsook the lower section of the city and sought sanctuary in the citadel. He repelled the Ionians and their allies while awaiting reinforcements. The inadvertent incineration of a significant portion of the city, including the temple of Cybele, the great mother goddess, failed to diminish the determination of Artaphernes and his Lydian and Persian forces. Upon the advent of a formidable Persian cavalry contingent, the assailants retreated. However, they were intercepted near Ephesus and suffered a significant loss. Aristodemus's forecast of a facile triumph had been demonstrated to be erroneous. The Athenians and Eretrians set sail and went home with accounts of the Persians' resolve and the preeminence of their cavalry. The Persian monarch abandoned the Ionians to confront his fury unaided. The Ionians once more assumed the initiative, sending vessels north and south to the Hellespont and Caria to incite a wider insurrection among the subjects of King Darius. They additionally endorsed an insurrection among the Greek cities of Cyprus, although it was ephemeral. In 497, a ship from the Phoenician cities sent a substantial Persian force to Cyprus. The tyrants appointed by the Persians in the cities of Salamis and Kaurion defected to the Persian side at a crucial juncture. And despite naval support from the Ionians, the Cypriots were vanquished. In 497, Darius dispatched additional Persian forces to reassert control over the Hellespontine region and Caria. But one contingent, led by his son-in-law Darius, was attacked by the Carians at Pedassos and nearly annihilated. Despite his other commanders achieving greater success to the north, this defeat was a significant setback, compelling Darius to postpone a robust land and sea offensive against the primary stronghold of the insurrection, Miletos, until 494. At this point, his political adversaries had assassinated Aristodemus and expelled him from Miletos. The demise of their primary commander significantly undermined the unity of the insurrection, and skepticism towards those attempting to assume his role obstructed the organization of the struggle against the Persians. Upon Histiaios's return to Miletos, allegedly on a peace mission from Darius, but secretly to position himself as the new head of the insurrection, he was repelled by the Milesians. He sought sanctuary in Mytilene on the island of Lesbos. The closest entity to a unified political structure among the Ionians was their koinonia, a religious assembly convening annually at the Panionion, a temple of Poseidon located in the province of Priene. The assembly's objective was non-political, lacking the requisite frameworks to create a cohesive leadership. Upon successfully assembling their naval troops at the island of Lade, near the coast of Miletos, a contention arose regarding the appointment of a commander. The naval troops at the Battle of Lade illustrate the Ionians' comparative size, affluence, and strength. There were 80 vessels from Miletos, 12 from Priene, 3 from Myus, 17 from Teos, 8 from Erythrae, and 3 from Phocaea. The principal islands provided substantial contingents: 100 from Chios, 60 from Samos, and 70 from Lesbos, whose cities, although not officially part of the Ionian League, yet engaged in the insurrection. Dionysios of Phocaea, who commanded the smallest contingent, was ultimately appointed leader. Nevertheless, despite his nomination mitigating disputes among the larger nations, he lacked the authority to unify the various contingents. The Ionian fleet, comprising 353 vessels, constituted slightly over half the strength of the Persian naval contingent, which totaled 600 ships, primarily supplied by the Phoenician cities, along with contributions from Egypt and Cilicia. The Samians initially abandoned the cause, except for 11 intrepid yet reckless captains. Subsequently, the Lesbians emulated this action and retreated to their island residences. Miletos was susceptible to attack because of the absence of a significant naval force for its protection. The Persian commanders enlisted skilled military engineers from Phoenicia, who breached the city using mines and battering rams. The remaining cities and islands were systematically subdued and penalized for their insurrection. The insurrection ultimately yielded favorable results for the Ionian Greeks. In 493, the satrap Artemisium mandated that representatives from the Greek states convene in Sardis to pledge oaths to subject all intercity disputes to arbitration. This indicates that their respective administrations were operating sufficiently to allow for the selection of envoys. The arbitrators were likely appointed by the Ionian koinon. Artemisium re-evaluated the annual tribute obligations of each city and island to the king, rendering this load more palatable and reducing the likelihood of future insurrections. In the subsequent year, King Darius dispatched another son-in-law, Mardonios, to oversee the province. He eliminated the last tyrants and permitted the Greeks under his authority to form democratic administrations, adhering to the principle of isonomia, a central tenet of the uprising. Nonetheless, Mardonios's appointment had an additional objective: to initiate the subsequent phase of the Persian incursion into the Aegean. He transported his fleet and troops across the Hellespont to Thrace, where he accepted the capitulation of the island of Thasos, together with its fleet of triremes. Subsequently, he proceeded down the northern coastline of the Aegean towards Macedon. A violent tempest sank 300 vessels at the point of Mount Athos. However, Mardonios had facilitated the potential incursion into the Greek mainland. The Persians belonged to an ancient group of peoples who spoke languages akin to contemporary Iran's. They likely originated in Central Asia as nomadic cattle herders. But by the conclusion of the 11th century, they had established themselves in the area known as Persia, modern Fars, the southeastern extremity of the Zagros Mountains. 9th century Assyrian writings reference them with the Medes, who inhabited the region to the north and west. The formidable kingdom of Elam governed Persia until the mid-7th century. Following the diminishment of Elamite authority by the Assyrian monarch Ashurbanipal in 646, the Persians appeared to gain greater autonomy, establishing a nascent state under the governance of a royal lineage centered on the Elamite city of Anshan. Kyros II, referred to as Kyros the Great, ascended to the throne in 559 as the fourth monarch of this nascent country. Astyages, the Median ruler, launched an assault on his kingdom in 550. Kyros incited Astyages' army to revolt against their sovereign, resulting in their surrender of him. Kyros presented himself as a captive. Kyros subsequently advanced. Kyros ascended as the new sovereign of the Medes in the Median city of Ecbatana. Over the subsequent 2 decades, Kyros leveraged the united power of the Persians and the Medes to subjugate Lydia, Assyria, and Babylonia, expanding his empire eastward by incorporating Bactria and Sogdiana. He perished in 530 while attempting to suppress a rebellion among certain Bactrian tribes, bequeathing the throne to his son Cambyses. Cambyses concentrated his primary endeavors on subjugating Egypt. The Egyptian king, Amasis, established a formidable navy and pursued alliances with several Mediterranean states, including the Spartans and Samos, to counter the Persian incursion. Cambyses formed his own navy, recruiting maritime subjects from Ionia, Phoenicia, and Cilicia as crew members. In 525, he attacked Egypt and seized the newly appointed pharaoh, Psammetichos, during a 10-day siege of Memphis. He dedicated the subsequent 3 years to solidifying his dominion over Egypt. In 522, Cambyses perished after falling from his horse while returning to Persia. The circumstances surrounding his death are enigmatic, with implications that it may not have been accidental. He lacked a son. Hence, his brother Bardia should have succeeded him. Nevertheless, an ambitious nobleman named Darius orchestrated a palace revolution that culminated in Bardia's killing and the ascension of Darius, a distant royal relative, as the new king. These tumultuous events thrust the Persian Empire into disorder and civil conflict for over a year. Darius could rely on the backing of numerous prominent Persians, whose forces remained faithful to him, despite his unconventional usurpation of authority. Ultimately, he vanquished all competing aristocracy and numerous local dynasts who exploited the internal turmoil to liberate themselves from Persian domination. Darius established a new Persian dynasty called the Achaemenids, as they traced their lineage to Achaemenes, an ancestor of Cyrus the Great. Darius incorporated regions of Central Asia and the majority of northwest India under the Persian Empire. He battled ineffectively against the Scythians in the western Black Sea region and expanded his dominion into Europe by subjugating portions of Thrace along the northern Aegean shore. Darius, the Great King. The Persian king Darius was a usurper who ascended to the throne by a coup and the assassination of a legitimate monarch. Nonetheless, in his official account of events, recorded on a prominent rock face at Behistun in northern Iran, adjacent to the royal road from Ecbatana, travelled to Babylon, asserting that he was the rightful heir of Cambyses and that his reign was divinely endorsed by Ahura Mazda, the patron deity of the Achaemenid monarchs. Subsequent excerpts from the inscription illustrate Darius's desired perception and view of the empire he governed. I am Darius, the great king, sovereign of sovereigns, ruler of Persia, and monarch of all territories. Darius the king proclaims, my lineage has produced 8 monarchs, and I am the 9th in direct succession. Darius the king proclaims, I am sovereign by the favor of Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda bestowed upon me the kingship. The subsequent lands are my own. I am their sovereign by the grace of Ahura Mazda. Persia, Elam, Babylonia, Assyria, Arabia, Egypt, the maritime peoples, Phoenicia, Lydia, Ionia, Media, Armenia, Cappadocia, Parthia, Drangiana, Aria, Arachosia, and Marcan, totaling 23 territories. Darius, the king, asserts, I rewarded loyalty and severely punished treachery in these territories. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, these territories were submitted to my authority. Any instructions I provided to them were completed. The inscription was composed in 3 languages: Elamite, the empire's lingua franca; Akkadian, the language of Babylonian royalty; and Old High Persian, the official language of the Persian monarchs. We needed to create a new cuneiform script, as this language had never been documented. Despite the Persian king's official title as the Great King, the King of Kings, the King of all lands, his authority was not unconditional. He depended on the backing and collaboration of a substantial Persian nobility, to whom he was compelled to offer positions of affluence and authority in the newly acquired territories. A Persian aristocrat, a satrap, partitioned these territories into provinces and governed each. The satraps were crucial in the administration of the empire, overseeing local matters and maintaining the allegiance of the citizenry. The significant expansion of the Persian Empire can be attributed to the aspirations of its elite. Kairos and his successors initiated operations of imperial expansion chiefly to fulfill the aspirations of these individuals. Persian nobles possessed a long-standing heritage of being formidable warriors and autonomous aristocrats. Hence, they rejected a subordinate position within the empire's structure. Individuals closely associated with the king were frequently appointed as satraps of significant or strategically vital provinces, while others were entrusted with military commands or other positions of authority. They resided in opulent palaces and enjoyed utilizing expansive properties in the provinces. The monarchs employed the public distribution of esteemed presents, especially gold and silver, to signify the most favored nobles. The Persians preserved unity and uniqueness by several means, such as attire, the usage of the Persian language, and the education of their sons. Persian boys spent the initial 5 years of their lives with their mothers and other women in the household, but were subsequently instructed to become soldiers and rulers. The Persians anticipated 3 primary attributes from their sons: equestrian proficiency, archery skills, and veracity. The Persian aristocracy did not entirely isolate themselves from the empire's subjugated populations. Intermarriage between Persians and non-Persians was promoted, with the daughters of Persian nobles wed to local rulers, and Persians espousing local aristocratic women as wives or concubines. Kairos implemented a strategy of honoring local customs and maintaining certain local nobles and religious leaders under his rule of Media, Lydia, and Babylonia. Cambyses and Darius subsequently took this approach in Egypt and other regions. Individuals from subjugated territories who held positions of authority were frequently accorded elevated status and welcomed into the king's court with the honorary designation of royal friend. Exiles from regions beyond the empire in pursuit of the great king's protection and support occasionally received comparable recognition. The Persian monarchs utilized their vast territory through two primary methods. They imposed regular tribute payments on the subjugated populations and employed their labor in military campaigns to acquire new territory or quell uprisings in existing dominions. Numerous satrapies allocated little lands to subordinate Persians and Medians, affording them meager incomes. The king anticipated they would sustain their roles as cavalrymen and charioteers, or supply infantry soldiers for his forces in exchange. During years when such services were not required, the estates were liable for silver or in-kind taxes, similar to other lands within the satrapy. Historical sources indicate that the Persian Empire developed into a sophisticated administration that governed the satrapies and allocated their revenues according to the king's directives. This administration provided sustenance to royal court members and several other significant figures, and supplies from the royal warehouses. A network of roads connected the principal cities, including Sardis, Ecbatana, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis. These roads were chiefly utilized by soldiers and royal messengers, who had access to way stations while also enabling the transportation of trade and tribute throughout the empire. During Darius's reign, the Persian Empire was the most expansive in the ancient world. It extended from the Balkans to the Indus River, and its wealth and labor resources rendered the great king the most formidable monarch in the ancient world. The primary combatants in Persian armies were often infantrymen of Persian descent, equipped with substantial shields, commonly constructed from leather and osier. They engaged in combat utilizing an array of weaponry, including as long spears, axes, swords, and bows with arrows. Their rudimentary armor is mostly of a padded linen cuirass and possibly a helmet. However, most depictions illustrate them with caps or hoods. The Persians organized into regiments of 1,000, subsequently becoming divisions of 10,000. The Immortals section was paramount, as they continually replenished losses to maintain a strength of 10,000. The Immortals comprised an elite unit referred to as the King's Spear Carriers. This regiment was exclusively composed of the Persian elite. The conquest of Lydia in 547 revealed to Cyrus the Great the necessity for a dependable contingent of Persian cavalry, prompting him to allocate the captured territories to Persian aristocrats to breed horses and serve monarchs who employed Medes as cavalry. And from the era of Darius onwards, they enlisted mercenary infantry and cavalry from the Saka tribes of Central Asia. They conscripted soldiers from the empire's subjugated populations for significant military operations, recruiting individuals from distant regions such as Egypt and India. Nevertheless, the most dependable warriors were the Persians and the mercenaries from Iran and Central Asia. The ascendants of Sparta. The Greeks, primarily as small city-states, confronted the formidable Persian Empire in the 5th century. These settlements differed in scale, typically comprising an urban nucleus featuring principal temples and public edifices, encircled by agricultural land, cultivated by male citizens, their families, and enslaved individuals. The historical roots of these city-states are veiled by the myths and legends that subsequent generations have added to the narratives of their forebears. The Spartans originated from a collection of Greek-speaking tribes that established themselves in Laconia, located in the southeastern Peloponnese, around the late 11th century. Approximately a century later, 5 villages in the expansive plain of the Eurotas River amalgamated to establish a singular city named Sparta. This arrangement was a compromise wherein the new kingdom would be jointly governed by 2 royal houses, the Agiadae and the Eurypontii, each supplying a king for the Spartans. A council of elders, referred to as the Grouse, thereafter limited to 28 members, provided counsel to these monarchs. The new metropolis progressively asserted dominance over neighboring settlements, bringing them under its authority. Although the new city relegated some individuals to servitude, others preserved autonomy. Their population was not completely assimilated with the Spartans socially and politically. Nevertheless, they participated alongside them in subsequent operations of expansion and annexation. Their residents were called the perioikoi, signifying those who reside nearby. By the late 8th century, the Spartans and their allies successfully vanquished the inhabitants of Messenia, a vast, fertile area in the southwestern Peloponnese, bordered from the plain of Laconia by the elevated ridges of Mount Taygetos. The Messenians were challenging to subjugate, and in the mid-7th century they revolted against the Spartans, initiating a protracted and brutal conflict. This conflict ultimately concluded with a complete triumph for the Spartans, who seized control of Messenia and compelled the residents to enter servitude. The previous territories of the Messenians were partitioned into estates of approximately equal dimensions and distributed to individual Spartan residents, who did not reside on the estates, but received up to 50% of the agricultural yield as rental compensation. The Messenians were referred to as helots, similar to the Laconian slaves of the Spartans. Acquiring people and agricultural resources in Laconia and Messenia allowed the Spartans to structure their community distinctively. The helots supplied a subservient labor force, providing food and essential goods, whilst the perioikoi participated in manufacturing crafts and trade beyond Laconia. This allocation of labor enabled the Spartan citizens to establish an elite social and political faction known as the equals, homoioi. Their dual rulers, acting as military leaders during Spartan conflicts, persisted in governance. The equals convened in an assembly to deliberate on significant matters, including war declarations and forming alliances with other states. However, their community was administered daily by 5 elected officials known as ephors. By the conclusion of the 6th century, the ephors had attained substantial power, surpassing that of the kings. The equals dedicated themselves to military training and progressively transformed into the most formidable force in the Greek realm. They mastered the technique of hoplite warfare, engaging in foot combat within tight formations, utilizing a substantial circular shield and an elongated thrusting spear. Spartans were renowned for their valor and discipline, so they participated in the politics of surrounding city-states, typically at the request of one of their factions. Refer to Portrait of a Soldier for an exposition of the Spartan educational and social framework. Numerous Greek city-states encountered social and political turmoil between the 7th and 6th centuries. The hereditary aristocracies governing them faced mounting pressure to distribute power and resources, particularly agricultural land, the primary source of prosperity. This burden was alleviated by promoting emigration, especially to Sicily, southern Italy, and the northern Aegean, where numerous affluent Greek settlements had been founded in the 9th and 7th centuries. Ultimately, the calls for political and social reform incited violent clashes, leading to the emergence of charismatic leaders among the discontented factions in numerous city-states. They usurped the governing factions and established themselves as the sole authorities. The Greeks employed the term tyrannos derived from Near Eastern origins to characterize such individuals. The term is commonly rendered as tyrant in contemporary accounts of ancient Greece, yet it did not inherently possess the connotations of repressive or unpopular governance that the modern interpretation of tyranny suggests. In the 6th century, the Spartans dismantled numerous tyrannies, including those in Corinth, Sicyon, Naxos, and Athens. They also endeavored to depose Polycrates, the tyrant of Samos. Athens before the Persian Wars. Athens was among the major Greek city-states. Athens served as the ecclesiastical and political hub of the expansive region encompassing the entire Attica Peninsula. Tradition maintained that the region was unified under the monarchy of the legendary hero Theseus. Nevertheless, by the mid-7th century, the Athenians were ruled by 9 yearly appointed officials known as archons, selected from a limited number of aristocratic families. A significant portion of the common populace of Attica harbored resentment towards the aristocracy's monopoly on power, which motivated an Athenian nobleman named Cylon to endeavor to establish himself as a dictator in 632. Cylon triumphed in a chariot race in the Olympic Games, indicating his considerable fortune and marriage to the daughter of Theagenes, the tyrant of Megara. With Theagenes' assistance, Cylon assembled a modest group of adherents and captured the Acropolis of Athens. His coup failed to garner much support from the Athenians, many of whom participated in besieging Cylon and his followers. While Cylon and a portion of his immediate family evaded capture, the remainder were compelled to capitulate and were thereafter executed. The sources of discontent persisted, including aristocratic land domination, elevated rents, rampant debt bondage, and the exclusion of several affluent individuals from governmental involvement. In 594, an aristocrat named Solon was appointed to reform Athens's social and political systems. He alleviated issues of debt bondage and permitted affluent non-aristocrats to access the archonship. He also instituted a council of 400 to enhance civic engagement in governance. His changes were insufficient for numerous Athenians, who contested the legitimacy of governance in the Athenian state. In 546, following 2 prior unsuccessful attempts, an aristocrat named Pisistratos, who had garnered a significant reputation as a military leader against the neighboring state of Megara, established himself as a dictator. Until his demise in 528, he preserved his authority by guaranteeing that his allies controlled the archons annually. Hippias, his eldest son, endeavored to sustain the dynasty. Nonetheless, his reign became tyrannical and disfavored following the assassination of his younger brother Hipparchus in 514. The prominent aristocratic family, the Alcmaeonidae, who played a significant role in thwarting Cylon's bid for dictatorship, bribed the Delphic oracle to influence Spartan intervention. In 510, King Cleomenes of Sparta sent an army into Attica and ousted Hippias, who sought asylum with King Darius of Persia. Cleomenes' intervention in Athens adhered to a long-standing Spartan policy of ousting tyrants in other Greek city-states, facilitating their return to aristocratic governance and fostering alliances with Sparta. In Athens, however, additional conflicts among the prominent families led to establishing an alternative governmental structure. In 508/07, Cleisthenes of the Alcmaeonidae faced a power battle against the aristocracy Isagoras, yet garnered substantial support by pledging dramatic political reforms in Athens. In retaliation, Isagoras summoned Cleomenes to command a Spartan contingent into Attica to expel Cleisthenes and his adherents. Most Athenian inhabitants favored the proposed reforms over the persistence of aristocratic conflict, ultimately compelling Cleomenes and his forces to retreat. along with Isagoras. Cleisthenes successfully returned to Athens to execute his reform agenda. He established a novel organizational framework for the Athenians, consisting of 140 local communities termed demes. All males aged 18 and above were registered as citizens via their demes, consolidated into 10 newly formed tribes, supplanting the former 4 tribes that were localized kinship units controlled by specific aristocratic families. The demes provided a robust framework for municipal governance. The tribes established a system enabling all citizens to participate actively in governance via a newly formed council of 500 members, constituted by randomly picking 50 individuals from each tribe. The council suggested new laws and policies requiring assembly approval before implementation. The idea of political equality, isonomia, granted all male citizens the right to participate in this assembly and vote on the proposed proposals. A council of generals consisting of political and military leaders selected one individual from each tribe. To avert further internal political strife that had prompted his reforms, Cleisthenes established a mechanism for the citizen assembly to annually vote on the exile of a prominent political figure for 10 years. The voting occurred by inscribing an individual's name on a fragment of pottery, termed ostrakon in Greek. Thus, the procedure was referred to as ostracism. Their newly acquired political cohesion and military prowess motivated the Athenians to assert dominance over other Greek city-states. They vanquished their northern neighbours, the Boeotians, and annexed territory from the city of Chalkis, on the island of Euboea. They initiated an extended conflict against the island of Aegina for supremacy over the Saronic Gulf. However, they lacked a substantial navy to confront the Aeginetans at sea. Attica was a flourishing territory with an expanding populace, and certain intrepid aristocrats conducted journeys to the Hellespont and other areas of the Aegean, where new settlements had been founded under the reign of Peisistratos and his son. Several of these organizations re-established themselves in Athens in the early 5th century as the area fell under Persian control during King Darius's reign. Darius dispatches an expedition to Greece. In 491, King Darius of Persia dispatched envoys to the prominent city-states of mainland Greece, demanding their submission by presenting symbolic gifts of earth and water. Numerous states acquiesced to this demand, including the substantial island state of Aegina. But Athens and Sparta were among those who declined to recognize his authority. In Athens, the king's envoys were executed by being cast into a pit, typically used for the punishment of offenders. The Athenians may have been driven by their persistent struggle with Aegina, their principal maritime adversary in the Saronic Gulf. They may have also become aware of Darius's plan to reinstate Hippias, the son of Peisistratos, as the tyrant of Athens. Darius gathered an army in Cilicia and commanded his maritime subjects, particularly the Ionian Greeks, to prepare a fleet of warships and horse transports. This entailed supplying tens of thousands of rowers for the ships and sending a contingent of soldiers for the expedition. Although most of his army likely originated from the Iranian heartlands of the Persian Empire. The figures provided by ancient sources regarding the army's size, ranging from 90,000 to 600,000 men, are evidently inflated. However, it likely consisted of approximately 25,000 soldiers, including 1,000 cavalry and a fleet of up to 600 ships. The expedition was led by Datis, a Median noble engaged in the Persian counter-offensive against the Ionians in 494, and Artaphernes, the son of the satrap of Lydia and the king's nephew. The objective of this mission was not the total subjugation of mainland Greece, which would require a somewhat bigger contingent, but rather the creation of a foothold on the eastern shore, ideally at Athens. Once they controlled this base, they could amass greater forces for a full-scale invasion. The initial objective of the mission was the island of Naxos, where the inhabitants prudently chose not to resist the Persians this time, retreating into the mountains and forsaking their city and temples to the invaders. Another island from the Cyclades has been submitted, and several vessels were added to the fleet of the great king. The residents of Euboea mounted resolute resistance, compelling the Persians to besiege the cities of Charistos and Eretria. The former provided 5 vessels for the unsuccessful Ionian expedition against Sardis in 498 and solicited assistance from Athens. The Athenians recently expropriated land from the Euboean city of Chalkis and established 4,000 residents there. The troops were ordered to march to Eretria to defend the city. However, they found that the Eretrians were conflicted on the prudence of persisting in their resistance against the Persians. The settlers traversed to Athens, evading capture in Eretria when Datis and Artaphernes arrived with their fleet and army, having convinced the Charistians to capitulate within a few days. The Persians besieged Eretria and launched a furious assault, resulting in significant deaths for both factions. On the 7th day of the siege, the pro-Persian party in Eretria breached the gates. The residents were compelled to atone for their prior support during the Ionian revolt. Their city and temple were incinerated, and the majority were enslaved. Having accomplished its initial goals, the expedition departed for the shore of Attica. Considering the deaths incurred during the conquest of Euboea, and the necessity of leaving substantial detachments with Artaphernes to secure the island, it seems probable that the contingent headed by Datis to Attica comprised fewer than 20,000 soldiers. Datis's objective was to execute a landing in Attica, seize the city of Athens, and reinstate the ousted tyrant Hippias. Hippias, who accompanied the Persians as a guide, advisor, and prospective puppet king of Athens, encouraged Datis to take the fleet across the narrow Euboean Strait and land the troops at the Bay of Marathon on the eastern shore of Attica. It was the nearest acceptable landing place to Eretria and could provide enough water and pasturage. The plain at Marathon was sufficiently expansive to accommodate the entire Persian army, including the cavalry, in opposition to any defending forces. Hippias likely anticipated a kind reception from the populace of eastern Attica, who had fervently endorsed his father's tyranny. The Battle of Marathon. The Athenian generals resolved to engage the Persians immediately upon their arrival rather than permit them to advance towards their city and endure a siege. As the Eretrians had experienced, they may have also been apprehensive about certain citizens favouring the invaders and the banished ruler Hippias, if permitted to establish a presence on Athenian territory. The Athenians mustered an army of approximately 9,000, predominantly consisting of hoplite warriors. They were accompanied by 600 men from the minor city of Plataea, located northwest of Attica, which had been an ally of Athens for approximately 30 years. Upon learning of the Persian landing at Marathon, they traversed the middle plain of Attica and proceeded down the eastern coastline to Marathon. The Athenians and their Plataean allies positioned themselves on elevated terrain adjacent to the route extending south from Marathon to Athens, anticipating the Persians' forthcoming action. Herodotus indicates that the Athenian commanders deliberated on the possibility of an attack. However, this may represent a subsequent reconstruction of the battle. The Greeks were more inclined to await the enemy's action. The Athenians and Plataeans were significantly outnumbered, and their commanders would have been hesitant to abandon their fortified position for the exposed plain of Marathon. Doing so would have rendered them susceptible to cavalry assaults and the risk of being outflanked by the more substantial Persian contingent. The Athenians may have been anticipating reinforcements from Sparta. Before departing Athens for Marathon, the Athenians dispatched their finest runner, Philippides, to the. He solicited assistance from the Spartans and traversed a distance of around 140 miles in under 2 days. The Spartans consented to dispatch a contingent to assist the Athenians, but their departure was postponed due to their participation in a significant religious celebration. necessitating their wait until the full moon indicated its conclusion. They departed and advanced remarkably to Marathon 6 days later, arriving just 3 days thereafter. Nevertheless, they came too late to participate in the combat that occurred the previous day. Herodotus's narrative details an extended dispute among the 10 Athenian generals, with one faction contending that the might of the Persian forces warranted a delay until their approach, while the opposing faction maintained that an immediate assault was essential. Herodotus states that the stalemate caused by this equal division of viewpoints was resolved by the intervention of Callimachus, who served as polemarch. Previously, this person served as the leader of the Athenian army. Under the new democratic constitution, the army was overseen by a council of 10 elected generals, one representing each of the 10 tribes. Callimachus held a primarily honorary post. However, he accompanied the army during conflicts within the confines of Attica and possessed the right to vote on significant decisions. Herodotus states that General Miltiades convinced Callimachus to support an offensive by arguing that further postponement would result in Persian triumph and Athenian subjugation. As Herodotus reported, Miltiades foresaw that delay would instill division and fear among the Athenians, leading them to defect to the Medes. This suggests that the decision to launch an attack was motivated by the desire to avert treason or defection. The presence of Hippias, the former dictator of Athens, among the Persians offered a compelling cause to assume that some of his adherents may defect and influence others to do the same. A recent instance was the treachery of the Persians against Eretria. The prolonged resistance of the Athenians and Plataeans, along with their assessment of the enemy's might, would facilitate their belief in the futility of victory, leading them to contemplate submission to the great king's authority as a preferable option. The Persian commander Datis may have awaited a signal indicating a decline in the enemy's determination. This protracted standoff endured for several days, during which no negotiations occurred, nor was there any skirmishing between the two factions. The Athenian generals ultimately resolved to assault the Persians. Numerous individuals have provided various rationales for this audacious decision. One scenario is that the Persians organized for combat and commenced their approach towards the Athenian stronghold, enticing them onto the plain for a conclusive confrontation. Indeed, for the Persians to advance on Athens, they needed to eliminate the forces obstructing the southern and western roads. An alternative proposition is the assertion, posited by a Byzantine scholar centuries later, that the Athenians received intelligence from the Ionian Greeks within the opposing forces, indicating that segments of the Persian army, particularly the cavalry, had commenced boarding their vessels for a maritime expedition around southern Attica to assault the city from the sea. A modification in the arrangement of the Persian forces certainly incited the Athenian advance. The Greeks launched an assault early in the day, possibly when the Persian commanders were still organizing their troops. The Persian army's extensive deployment prompted the Athenians and their Plataean allies to fear encirclement, leading them to elongate their front. This maneuver diluted their hoplite ranks at the center, while maintaining a robust presence on each flank. Datis deployed his finest forces, comprising Persians and Sakai mercenaries from the northeastern territories of Iran. His army comprised several archers, slingers, and soldiers armed with javelins, whose role was to assail the adversary from afar with projectiles before the engagement of the other warriors with spears, swords, and axes. The two armies confronted one another on the plain, approximately 1 mile apart, necessitating the Greeks to traverse the open terrain to confront the Persians. They executed most of this advance at a strolling pace, then sprinted the final 200 meters to engage the enemy, before their lines suffered excessive attrition from arrows, javelins, and sling stones. The Persians were unprepared for this rapid charge. They overestimated their opponent's commitment, which is natural, given that they had just overcome the Euboeans and were allowed to camp unopposed on Athenian land for several days. Nevertheless, they prepared to receive the charge, throwing multiple volleys of missiles into the Greek ranks to slow or halt it, and then drive them back. The Greeks soon closed the distance between the two armies and battled across a broad front. In the middle, where the finest Persian forces were amassed, they repelled the Athenians, driving them back toward their initial encampment. Nevertheless, the Athenians and Plataeans focused their efforts on the left flank, successfully repelling the Persian forces and undermining the cohesiveness and discipline of Datis's army. Faced with the Greek assault, the two Persian flanks disintegrated and retreated to their encampment. Upon recognizing their vulnerable flanks and the imminent threat of encirclement by the triumphant Greek forces, the Persians and Sarki withdrew. The Athenian and Plataean commanders assembled their troops and attacked them as they returned to camp. The absence of a comprehensive path was due to the discipline and expertise of the Persian officers, who established a rearguard and successfully facilitated the embarkation of numerous soldiers into the vessels anchored in the shallow waters adjacent to the camp. Their casualties were substantial, with 6,400 soldiers dead, many of whom were slaughtered as they clustered together, ensnared between the sea, the advancing Greeks, and a marshy region to the north of the Persian encampment. The Athenians lost 192 men, including the polemarch Callimachos. Casualties among the Plataeans were also minimal. The absence of the Persian cavalry's involvement in the battle perplexes several contemporary researchers. Herodotus omits them from his account. Hence, the Byzantine assertion that the cavalry boarding the ships is regarded with gravity. The Persian cavalry comprised many ethnic groupings, including indigenous Persians and subjects from other empire regions. They predominantly utilized swords and spears and employed bows, arrows, and javelins for rapid assaults. The Athenians, who endured the Sardis invasion and the subsequent withdrawal to Ephesus in 498, may have amplified the peril posed by these cavalrymen. Light cavalry would possess a significant advantage when pursuing heavy infantry. Yet the infantry would be considerably less susceptible in a close-quarters conflict conducted over a limited area. If the Persian commanders, adhering to their customary strategy, positioned their cavalry on the flanks of the primary infantry formation, they would have been repelled by the resolute assault of the Greek hoplites. With their horses' enhanced speed and agility, they might have been among the first to retreat to the ships. Notwithstanding his setback at the plain of Marathon, Datis, likely influenced by Hippias, remained optimistic about the possibility of reaching Athens by water and seizing it before the return of the Athenian army. Consequently, he transported his surviving troops by water around Cape Sunion to the Bay of Phaleron. Upon recognizing that the Persians were advancing southward towards the city, the Athenians hastily returned and arrived in time to deter them from initiating an attack. Herodotus recounts that the Persians advanced toward Athens after perceiving a signal, a polished shield reflecting sunlight, purportedly provided by members of the Alcmaeonid family. However, Herodotus expresses skepticism regarding this account, a sentiment contemporary scholars echo. Datis returned to Asia Minor to inform the king of the expedition's failure, having been unable to advance against the Athenians. "We cremated the Athenians who perished at Marathon and interred their ashes in a burial mound at the battle site. The Soros mound remains intact and marks the approximate site of the principal confrontation between the two forces." A contingent of 2,000 Spartans arrived on the battlefield the day following the engagement. They examined the deceased Persians and commended the Athenians on their triumph before returning to Sparta. The Athenians commemorated their unforeseen triumph once they confirmed that the Persian army no longer posed a danger. This marked the inaugural occasion when a Greek army triumphed over a Persian force. It also signified a significant victory for the democratic citizenry of Athens. The typical Athenian and Plataean hoplites triumphed over a larger, more seasoned and perhaps better disciplined army in a remarkable exhibition of unity, valor, and unwavering resolve to protect their homeland. From the perspective of the Persian monarchs, the defeat at Marathon was a significant impediment to their campaign to avenge the Athenians and subjugate the Greek city-states. Yet for the Persians, Marathon was merely a preliminary setback. The invasion of Greece by Xerxes. Herodotus states that Darius pledged to avenge the defeat of his army against the Athenians. Upon receiving news of Marathon, he commanded recruiting the finest and most valiant warriors in Asia for another campaign. The assertion that this levy was executed just to subjugate the Greeks is improbable, as several regions of the Persian Empire also required stringent military enforcement. In 486, Darius was summoned to address a rebellion in one of the most problematic provinces of the Persian Empire, Egypt. Cambyses, his predecessor, subjugated this satrapy in 525-24, which remained under Persian dominion throughout the insurrections and civil conflicts that marked the initial years of Darius's rule. Ultimately, the tribute load imposed by the great king grew insufferable for the Egyptians, prompting them to seek the expulsion of the Persians. Egypt represented one of the most affluent and strategically significant satrapies. Hence, its insurrection posed a considerably bigger challenge to Darius's authority than the obstinate defiance of a few Greek city-states. Darius died of natural causes while in Persia, preparing for an expedition to subjugate the Egyptians. He was replaced by his eldest son, Xerxes. The new king promptly suppressed the Egyptian insurrection and reaffirmed his dominion as the Lord of all lands and the chosen of Ahura Mazda. By 484, all of Egypt was again under Persian dominion. Xerxes appointed his brother Achaemenes as satrap of Egypt before returning to Persia. The Egyptian uprising was among the various issues Xerxes inherited from his predecessor. Babylonia, a key satrapy, also insurrected Res 481. This satrapy held more strategic significance than Egypt due to its location along the primary communication routes connecting the eastern and western regions of the empire. Xerxes suppressed the insurrection with significant force and partitioned Babylonia into two smaller satrapies for enhanced governance. A significant concern for Darius's son was how to address the Athenians and other Greeks who had resisted his father's demand for submission to his power. While the extent of Xerxes' military preparations in the initial years of his reign aimed at subjugating the Greeks remains ambiguous, it is evident that avenging the defeat at Marathon was a paramount objective, and by 481 he was poised to advance his forces westward into Greece. Two facts demonstrate the significant priority Xerxes placed on his invasion of Greece. Initially, it was his choice to conduct the mission personally. In doing so, he adhered to the precedents established by Kairos, Cambyses, and Darius, who all conducted significant operations of imperial expansion westward against the Lydians, Egyptians, and Ionians, in that order. As a newly appointed king, he likely needed to demonstrate to his nobles that he was a deserving successor to the illustrious Darius. Secondly, the vast scale and variety of the armies Xerxes gathered from across his empire indicate his intention for this to be a monumental military victory. It was intended largely as a Persian accomplishment. However, all the peoples under Persian dominion contributed to and observed it. Xerxes departed Persia in the spring of 481 and proceeded to Sardis, the erstwhile capital of Lydia, and the primary administrative hub for Persian governance in western Anatolia. He gathered the majority of his forces there and subsequently advanced northwest to the Hellespont, which he traversed in early summer between Abydos and Sestos. Subsequently, he relocated his army to Doriskos, situated at the estuary of the Hebrus River, which provided an appropriate location for his troops to recuperate. His father, Darius, erected a fortress, Fort 512, during the fight against the Scythians. At Doriskos, Herodotus states that Xerxes inspected his army and fleet, followed by a directive for the fleet to converge with the army. Herodotus utilizes this assessment to delineate the several contingents of the Persian army and their respective proportions. In addition to the standard core of Iranian infantry and cavalry, the Persians, Medes, and Sakai, Herodotus states that the army included significant contingents from various regions of Asia, such as Bactrians, Babylonians, and Cappadocians. Herodotus enumerates a contingent of camel-mounted soldiers from Arabia and a force of rudimentary infantry from the interior of Ethiopia, among the more exotic and thus dubious factions present. The king's Ionian Greek subjects were obligated to provide soldiers for the army, specifically hoplites, but their primary commitment, akin to that of the Egyptians, Cilicians, and Phoenicians, was to the fleet. Xerxes has assembled a substantial contingent of archers, additional missile units, and considerable cavalry. The magnitude of Xerxes' army poses a challenging dilemma for historians. Herodotus reported that the army comprised 1,800,000 troops recruited in Asia, along with an additional 300,000 from European regions traversed en route to Greece, resulting in a total of 2,100,000. Furthermore, he asserts that there were more than 2,600,000 servants, attendants, and other camp followers, resulting in a total force exceeding 4,700,000, excluding the fleet's personnel. The figures provided by Herodotus are evidently inflated, likely stemming from a prevailing historical narrative that amplified the triumph of Greece by inflating the enemy's numbers. Consequently, determining the number of Xerxes' army is exceedingly challenging. Contemporary experts exhibit considerable divergence over the extent to which the figure for the land army should be diminished. Some estimate the number to be as low as 50,000, while a more liberal assessment is 200,000. We cannot provide a clear response, but it is plausible that the actual number lies between the two figures, especially between 100,000 and 150,000 combatants. It is more plausible to accept the figures provided by Herodotus regarding the size of the naval troops, as ships are significantly simpler to quantify than infantry. Observers positioned on a coastline observing a fleet passing by would likely be able to precisely tally each vessel. Conversely, if, as some academics assert, Herodotus or his sources accessed official Persian records regarding the forces engaged in the voyage, it is considerably more probable that the figures for the different segments of the fleet were reported accurately. Conversely, the army's contingents may have been enumerated in broad terms rather than specified as precise numbers. Herodotus states that, at its peak, Xerxes' fleet had 1,207 trireme warships, supplemented by almost 3,000 transport and supply vessels. These figures, albeit reflecting the complete capacity of the Persian navy, appear excessively large, resulting in several complications. Herodotus asserts that there were more than 250,000 rowers and sailors on these ships. However, it is possible that some were operated by minimal crews or towed by other vessels as reserve ships. It was a prevalent practice in the late 5th century for naval commanders to focus their personnel on their most efficient and rapid warships before combat. Regardless of the specific figures, it is certain that Xerxes was eager to guarantee the success of his voyage, concluding that assembling a formidable numerical advantage on both land and water was the most effective strategy. From Asia Minor to Hellenic Greece, Xerxes commanded comprehensive preparations along the expedition's path, extending from Western Asia Minor to northern Greece. 2 pontoon bridges were constructed for his army to traverse the Hellespont from Asia to Europe. They traversed one of the most constricted segments of the straits, situated between the cities of Abydos and Sestos. To construct each bridge, several hundred cruiser hulls were positioned perpendicularly to the dominant currents and interconnected by 6 robust cables. Wooden planks were positioned between the cables to create a continuous platform, over which a causeway was subsequently created using soil and brushwood. A barrier was constructed on both sides of the causeway to prevent animals crossing the bridges, including horses, mules, oxen, and camels, from perceiving the water and becoming startled. These bridges will have significantly reduced the time required, as loading and disembarking a large army onto transport ships would have consumed many days, and adverse weather conditions could have caused additional delays. Nevertheless, the weather nearly sabotaged the entire plan. A storm erupted during the construction of the bridges and destroyed both. Xerxes' wrath prompted him to execute the project's overseers, and in what may appear to us a peculiar ceremony, he had the waters of the Hellespont symbolically lashed and marked as if they were a disobedient enslaved individual. The troops and navy advanced from Doriskos up the Thracian coast towards Macedonia, converging at designated locations en route. Xerxes and his commanders coordinated the fleet and navy to prevent potential Greek seaborne raids on his land forces and supply depots while ensuring safe havens for his fleet in hostile waters. Initially, the fleet and army's trajectories were closely aligned, but they diverged around Acanthos to pursue separate tracks. Xerxes was resolute that his fleet would not succumb to the perilous North Aegean storms that had devastated the vessels led by Mardonios in 492, while they endeavoured to navigate around the promontory of Mount Athos. He consequently commanded the excavation of a canal across the low-lying plain at the narrowest section of the peninsula, adjacent to the settlement of Acanthos. Some remnants of this waterway remain visible today. The two factors converged in Therm, a quaint village located at the apex of the Thermaic Gulf. Xerxes subsequently directed the army southward into northern Greece, traversing the lower territories of the Macedonian realm, and advancing into the expansive plains of Thessaly. The Macedonians maintained amicable relations with the Persians since the era of Darius, whose military expeditions against the Scythians diminished the threat to Macedon from its northern adversaries. King Alexander I of Macedonia let Xerxes establish a supply depot on his land and provided additional men to the expanding Persian army. The supply depot constituted one of several bases created along the line of advance through Thrace and Macedonia. A notable accomplishment of the march from Sardis to central Greece is that Xerxes' commanders consistently provided sustenance and hydration for their troops and animals. An army exceeding 100,000 personnel would want substantial food and water, like its draft animals, including horses and camels. Nonetheless, the magnitude of the Persian navy rendered the transportation of provisions and fodder between staging locations to sustain the army unfeasible. The 1,207 trireme vessels would have transported a minimum of 200,000 rowers and sailors. Even assuming that many were not fully manned, approximately 3,000 additional vessels, as noted by Herodotus, would not have required extensive crews. Their function would have been to transport adequate supplies to sustain the fleet, rather than the army. The army would have conveyed provisions with draft animals such as camels and human porters. Freshwater resources would have been gathered and transported from one camp to another, but in limited amounts. Maintaining a reliable water supply was consistently a paramount concern for ancient military forces. Herodotus asserts that Xerxes' troops and livestock were so abundant that they depleted entire streams and rivers. However, this is likely another vivid exaggeration that should not be taken literally. Nonetheless, locating and distributing sufficient supplies of potable water was likely one of the most challenging responsibilities of those tasked with sustaining the army and navy, particularly during the later phases of the campaign in northern and central Greece, where substantial rivers were scarce, and numerous watercourses naturally desiccate in the summer months. The availability of suitable drinking water sources significantly influenced the specifics of the marching route. The residents of the provinces traversed by the army and navy faced significant hardship in sourcing food during their extensive journey. They anticipated that the Thracians and Macedonians would supply provisions for the troops and permit the animals to graze in their pastures. At every march phase, the army encamped around a large tent constructed for Xerxes and his nearest associates, primarily Persian and Median aristocrats, who anticipated being served from silver and gold vessels. The islanders of Thasos reported that their mainland possessions necessitated contributions, and the total expense of hosting Xerxes and his court in customary opulence, along with provisions of bread and meat for the soldiers and grain for the animals for a single day, amounted to a staggering 400 talents of silver. Megacreon, a prominent citizen of Abdera, reportedly advised his fellow citizens to be grateful that Xerxes consumed only one substantial meal daily. Otherwise, they would have been compelled to forsake their city rather than accommodate his army with 2 meals each day. Despite their constrained resources, these peoples were obligated to recognize Xerxes as their sovereign and offer whatever assistance they could muster. The size of Xerxes' forces deterred the regional, tribal, and city leaders from direct confrontation, and his evident intention to traverse the area rather than establish dominion likely motivated them to expedite the Persians' passage. Aligning with a formidable invading force to partake in the Greek spoils may have also predisposed the northern Aegean populations to acquiesce to the great king. Xerxes assembled these supplementary soldiers to underscore that their territories were integral to his dominion. As a result, there were no efforts to contest the army or the navy during their advance on Greece, although Herodotus notes that some camels were assaulted by lions while the army traversed Macedonia. The announcement of the Persian king's preparation of a substantial invasion force provoked varied responses in Greece. Many Greek city-states united to form a coalition known to contemporary historians as the Hellenic League, derived from the term Hellenes, which the ancient Greeks employed to refer to themselves. The inaugural assembly of this league in 481 was significant for the member government's commitment to cease all hostilities and establish enduring alliances. Consequently, Athens and Aegina, 2 adversaries engaged in conflict for nearly 2 decades, now established a robust alliance to oppose the Persians. The Spartans were designated as the leaders of the League troops, both on land and at sea, despite a proposal for the Athenians to lead the naval contingents. Agents were dispatched to Asia Minor to gather intelligence on Xerxes' preparations, while emissaries were sent to other influential Greek states and confederations throughout the Mediterranean to solicit assistance. It is evident that not all significant Greek city-states participated in the League. However, determining its exact membership is challenging. Herodotus enumerates the Greeks who medized, meaning they submitted to the Persian king and offered symbolic gifts of earth and water to recognize his dominion, including several states that were initially part of the Hellenic League, such as the Thessalians, Thebans, and Phocians. These states capitulated to Xerxes only after his forces invaded their lands, and their friends deserted them, while Argos, a staunch adversary of Sparta, declined to participate in an alliance led by Sparta. Leadership. Other Greek city-states accused the Argives of having previously pledged assistance to Xerxes. The Argives refrained from assisting the Persians, maybe anticipating the conclusion of the Hellenic League contest. Under the leadership of Gelon, Syracuse declined assistance while spearheading a Sicilian confederation in a conflict against the expanding Carthaginian hegemony in Sicily. The Confederation of Cretan cities likewise declined to provide any aid. The affluent island state of Corcyra, present-day Corfu, did send a contingent of 60 ships in answer to the Hellenic League's request. Nevertheless, they did not advance beyond the southern coast of the Peloponnese, and did not participate in the actual combat. Like the Argives, the Corcyrians opted for neutrality and abstained from involvement in the fight until they were assured of one side's triumph. In the early summer of 480, as Xerxes and his army traversed the Hellespont, the dominant governing dynasty of Thessaly, the Aleudai, were poised to receive him, having allied with the Persians since 492. Certain dissident factions inside Thessaly opposed this stance, and urged the Hellenic League to dispatch a contingent to confront the Persians at the Thessaly-Macedonia border. An army of 10,000 League hoplites led by Ionetos the Spartan advanced to the valley of the Peneus River at Tempe, the principal passage into Thessaly from Lower Macedonia. Within a few days they relinquished this position, leaving the Thessalians with no choice except to capitulate to Xerxes. The League commander concluded that other alternative paths into Thessaly existed, which Xerxes could exploit to circumvent the pass at Tempe. Xerxes notably brought the forces of the Hellenic League by sea to the Gulf of Pagasai, located on the southern periphery of Thessaly. The strategy was to position their fleet there to counter any Persian attempts to navigate around and deploy forces in their rear. Opinions within the Hellenic League were now polarized between the Peloponnesian members, such as Sparta and Corinth, who supported retreating to the narrow isthmus of Corinth, and the non-Peloponnesian states, including Thebes and Athens, who contended that their territories should not be relinquished without resistance. A decision was made to establish a defensive position in central Greece at a narrow corridor between the mountains and the sea, known as Thermopylae, or Hot Gates, due to its sulphurous hot springs. This passage was essentially the sole route from Thessaly into central Greece, accessible to Xerxes' vast army, making it the optimal defensive location. A contingent was dispatched to secure the pass, and a naval force was gathered too. Assume a position at Artemisium located at the northern extremity of Euboea. The fleet would obstruct the Persians from deploying troops along the coastline behind the Greek army at Thermopylae. Leonidas, a Spartan king, assumed overall command of the forces, while the naval contingent was entrusted to another Spartan, Eurybiades. The contingent dispatched to Thermopylae consisted of approximately 8,000 hoplites, with a minimal number being Spartans. The primary Laconian contingent, consisting of approximately 1,000 individuals, was likely sourced from the Perioikoi. Leonidas was accompanied by a select bodyguard of 300 Spartan citizens, chosen for their valor and resolve, each having left behind living sons in Sparta. As customary personal helot servants, who could also engage in combat as light-armed infantry, accompanied them. There were 2,800 additional Peloponnesians there, predominantly from the city of Arcadia, located north of Laconia, while the remaining forces originated from central Greece, chiefly from the provinces of Malis, Phocis, eastern Locris, and Boeotia. Herodotus attributes the limited number of Spartans to the same factor that accounted for their tardiness in arriving at Marathon a decade prior. They commemorated a significant religious event, the Carnaia, and could not depart from Sparta until its conclusion. The restricted number of other Peloponnesians is attributed to a religious obligation, specifically the quadrennial Olympic celebration that deterred many from attending. Some academics have proposed a less honorable rationale, asserting that the Peloponnesian states were hesitant to allocate their labor force to the defense of central Greece, favoring the retention of their workforce near their territories. Nonetheless, numerous additional Greeks participated in the coordinated land and maritime effort. Herodotus states that the Greek fleet at Artemisium comprised 271 triremes, the primary naval assets of the Greeks operated the trireme fleets of Athens, Corinth, and Aegina. If, as in subsequent years, each vessel accommodated 170 rowers and 30 sailors and marines, the fleet would comprise approximately 54,000 men, including a minimum of 10 hoplites and 4 archers on each ship, totaling roughly 4,000 soldiers. The robust Athenian presence stemmed from a recent shipbuilding initiative. In 488/87, the Athenians faced a severe shortage of vessels for their conflict against the island of Aegina, necessitating the purchase of antiquated warships from Corinth. In 483, the Athenians experienced a financial boon upon uncovering a lucrative silver vein in the public mines at Laurion. Themistocles, an ambitious politician, persuaded them to allocate the proceeds towards constructing a new fleet of triremes rather than sharing them among the populace. By 480, they possessed 200 warships, making them the foremost naval contributor to the Hellenic League. They sought the choice of one of their generals to lead the Greek fleet. However, Sparta's numerous allies insisted on a Spartan commander instead. The Pass of Thermopylae was, in antiquity, a short corridor of land that served as the primary route between Thessaly and central Greece, flanked by towering mountains on one side and the sea on the other. The central piece, the middle gate, measured only 15 meters in width, where an ancient defensive wall constructed by the Phocians existed. Leonidas commanded a portion of his troops to reconstruct this to enhance the fortification of the position. He selected this location for his primary defense because, despite the pass being narrower at its termini, the east and west gates, the mountain inclines were significantly more gradual at those locations, allowing for the ascent of huge contingents of troops. Upon his arrival, several local Malians informed him of a path across the highlands south of Thermopylae that reconnects with the primary road at the east gate. The route was referred to as the Anapaia Trail. Since this route extended southward into Phocis, he stationed the Phocian hoplites at its midpoint, obstructing the Persians from utilizing it to encircle his position and assault his forces from behind. Xerxes' forces traversed the Spercheios River and established a camp near Trachis, west of Thermopylae, after August 480. The complete force required several days to assemble, during which the Persians conducted a reconnaissance of the enemy fortifications and reported their findings to the king and his commanders. Upon observing the vast magnitude of the Persian army assembled against him, Leonidas dispatched an urgent communique to the states of the Hellenic League, soliciting reinforcements. The extensive forces of Xerxes for his incursion into Greece were likely anticipated before their arrival. Herodotus states that Xerxes sent 3 Greek spies to Asia Minor for intelligence collection. They observed Xerxes assemble his troops at Sardis, but were apprehended and on the verge of execution when he commanded them to be escorted around the camp to witness the extensive infantry and cavalry units, demonstrating his army's formidable dominance. Like numerous anecdotes by Herodotus, this account is difficult to accept. However, even if the Greek spies were provided a tour of the army at Sardis, the Greek leaders would probably remain skeptical of these accounts and rumors until they verified them. Notwithstanding the formidable size of the Persian army, Leonidas was assured that his contingent of 8,000 men was sufficient for a temporary defense of the pass. However, he recognized the necessity for additional troops to reinforce the defense for an extended duration. Xerxes later purportedly extended an invitation to Leonidas to join his forces and assume the role of satrap in Greece to avert conflict. But Leonidas declined, arguing that it was preferable to perish for Greek liberty than to survive and govern them. Upon the arrival of the Persian army in Thermopylae, the fleet proceeded from Therma to Aphetai, located at the southern extremity of the Magnesia Peninsula. There, it encountered 3 reconnaissance vessels from the Greek fleet and successfully captured 2 of them. The Persians suffered multiple losses when landing on the eastern shore of Magnesia during their journey. A tempest arose and devastated over 1/3 of the Persian vessels. The survivors ultimately reached Aphetai and prepared to confront the Greeks at sea. The Greeks were likely astonished by the magnitude of the Persian fleet that was amassed at Aphetai following the storm. The tempest struck the Persian navy, comprising 1,207 triremes and over 3,000 more boats. It may require an extended duration, potentially several days, to acclimate to its new anchoring. The Greeks deliberated the possibility of vacating their position at Artemisium and advancing southward. Herodotus asserts that the primary Greek commanders, Athenian Themistocles, Spartan Eurybiades, and Corinthian Adimantos, were convinced to persist in the unified strategy to halt the Persian assault by land and water, solely through bribery. The Greeks possessed 271 triremes and approximately 50 more vessels. Subsequently, 53 Athenian triremes, perhaps part of the Athenians' reserve forces designated to protect Attica, were dispatched northward, possibly in response to a request for reinforcements akin to the one Leonidas issued upon observing the magnitude of Xerxes' army. The Persians' numerical superiority was likely daunting, which would have been evident to the Greeks as they monitored or received intelligence regarding the accumulation of Persian troops at Aphetai. The Persians possessed comprehensive knowledge regarding the magnitude of their adversaries' naval capabilities, primarily because of their initial triumph in seizing 2 Greek triremes together with their troops. Herodotus states that the Persians anticipated the smaller Greek contingent would retreat under the veil of night. Consequently, after the king's fleet gathered at Aphetai, they refrained from assaulting the Greeks until a squadron of 200 ships, sent southward to navigate around Euboea and obstruct the Greeks' escape, signaled its readiness. While the fundamental concept is plausible, some issues exist in fully endorsing Herodotus's account of this tactic. He posits that the vessels navigated a course beyond the island of Skyathos to evade detection while circumnavigating Euboea. However, this appears improbable, as Greek observers on Euboea would likely have detected the Persians at the outset and could have tracked their progress at various intervals along the route. They would likely have detached from the main fleet before arriving at Aphetai. Nevertheless, they could hardly have anticipated evading discovery during their journey, which, spanning over 400 kilometers, would likely require many days to accomplish. The maneuver aimed to ensnare the Greek vessels between the 2 divisions of the Persian navy for capture or destruction. A subsequent inquiry emerges from these reflections. How did the Persians synchronize the 2 divisions of their fleet? Herodotus explicitly states that the primary contingent at Aphetai was not to confront the Greeks until it received the signal indicating the arrival of the 200 ships' dispatch around Euboea. The strategy likely involved allocating a specific duration, 3 to 4 days, for the 200 ships to finalize their journey, following which the main fleet could ascertain their positioning and commence efforts to displace the Greeks from Artemisium into the ambush. The Persians' initial hesitation to assault the Greeks at Artemisium for at least 2 days is attributed to the necessity of allowing their flanking force to assume its position. According to Herodotus, their anticipation of the Greeks' retreat suggests they would have expected to learn of the enemy's frantic escape following the successful circumnavigation of Euboea by the 200 ships. As the Persians gathered their primary contingent at Aphetai, the Greeks seized 15 vessels that had separated from the main fleet and inadvertently navigated to the Greek stronghold at Artemisium. The Greeks likely acquired knowledge of the Persian strategy to dispatch a squadron around Euboea from the commanders of these vessels. However, Herodotus narrates the tale of Schilias of Scione, a Greek diver engaged by the Persians, who allegedly swam across the straits from Aphetai to Artemisium to alert the Greeks of the Persian scheme. Certain Greek commanders preferred to evade confrontation until dusk, and subsequently returned to engage the 200 vessels further south. Ultimately, Eurybiades concluded that his forces were sufficiently robust to confront the Persian fleet, which was still recuperating from prior storm damage. The Greeks launched an assault while the Persian ground forces confronted the defenders at Thermopylae's pass. The Persian fleet significantly outnumbered the Greeks, and its commanders addressed the issue. The 2 fleets encountered one another in comparatively wide waters, and the Persians promptly commenced encircling the Greeks, aiming to converge upon them and employ boarding techniques to seize their vessels. They transported many more combatants than the Greek vessels, encompassing Persian, Median, or Sakai troops contingents. The Greek vessels upheld a cohesive circular configuration to thwart isolated assaults and achieve dominance. Nevertheless, they progressively converged, compelling them to jeopardize a large-scale escape through enemy lines. The Greeks excelled at the swift ramming maneuver, seizing 30 Persian vessels with lighter and quicker ships. Likewise, a vessel from the Greek island of Lemnos, defected from the Persian faction. Eurybiades retreated for the night and told Leonidas he would maintain his position for another day. During the night, a Persian fleet of 200 ships navigating Euboea was ensnared by a violent storm at a location known as the Hollows and was annihilated. This not only eliminated the possibility of encircling the Greeks between two segments of the fleet, but also diminished the Persians' overall numerical superiority. The arrival of 53 Athenian ships at this juncture further helped to restore equilibrium. Upon discovering their advantageous position, the Greeks resumed hostilities and executed a rapid assault on the Persians, who were still anticipating confirmation of their detachment's arrival. Following the destruction of multiple Cilician vessels, Eurybiades convinced Leonidas of his capacity to endure for an additional day. The Battle of Thermopylae. The Greek defence at Thermopylae endured for 3 days. Initially, the Peloponnesians believed they could overpower the Greeks by sheer numerical superiority. However, the acute constriction of the middle section of the pass rendered it difficult for them to properly utilize their numerical advantage. Xerxes held the little Greek army in particularly high disdain. Herodotus reported that he dispatched 2 Median divisions, comprising approximately 20,000 soldiers, with instructions to apprehend the Greeks and deliver them to the monarch. Upon the Medes' retreat, following significant casualties, he commanded Hydarnes, the leader of the elite forces. The Persian contingent, referred to as the Immortals, commenced the engagement. However, even his most skilled men could not surmount the resolute opposition of the Greeks. It appears that Leonidas and his limited Spartan contingent originally endured most of the assault, although the Greeks rotated their forces, allowing numerous units to recuperate and consistently introduce fresh troops to the front line of the conflict. The substantial circular shields and elongated thrusting spears of the Greek hoplites proved highly efficient in close-quarter combat, while the Spartans had devised superior tactics to engage the enemy in battle. They would simulate a retreat then, as the adversary advanced, assured of triumph, pivot, and confront them directly. On the evening of the second day of combat, Xerxes, eager to eliminate the Greek forces and advance into central Greece, sent Hydarnes to lead the Immortals over the perilous Anopaea passage through the mountains to assault Leonidas and his troops from the rear. The mountain trail was arduous by day, but even more perilous by night. Fortunately for the Persians, a local individual from Trachis named Ephialtes, son of Eurydamos, emerged, seeking a substantial prize from Xerxes. He proposed to demonstrate the route and escort them along it and back to the eastern entrance of the pass. Hydarnes and his soldiers departed at dusk and traversed the mountain path towards the eastern gate of the pass. As dawn approached, the Persians faced the 1,000 Phocians stationed to defend against such illumination. Hydarnes first apprehended the existence of additional Spartans, but Ephialtes told him otherwise. The Phocians perceived the impending arrival of the Persians, but had little time to ready themselves. Assuming the Persians were Phocians, they retreated to a superior defensive position on a nearby hilltop when the arrows began to fly, prepared for combat. Hydarnes, a seasoned commander, seized the chance, directing his troops to disregard the Phocians and push towards the pass. Scouts assigned to the Phocians to monitor enemy movements alerted Leonidas a few hours in advance about the Persians' advance. Leonidas was faced with the decision to persist in holding the pass, or forsake it and withdraw southward. Some of Herodotus's sources reported that some Greeks fled upon hearing of the Persians' approach without awaiting their commander's decision. Herodotus is more predisposed to assert that Leonidas commanded their withdrawal, recognizing that the Greek contingent could no longer maintain control of the pass and that the adversary could assault from 2 flanks. In fact, not all Greeks withdrew, as Leonidas and his 300 Spartans remained, accompanied by a contingent of Boeotians, specifically 400 Thebans, whom some Greeks later asserted were retained by Leonidas as hostages, together with 700 hoplites from Thespiae. Leonidas's choice to maintain a limited contingent is strategically perplexing. The army was insufficient to significantly impede the advancement of the Persians, although it may have been intended as a rearguard to protect the escape of the remaining Greeks. If Persians, as a more audacious action to combat the invaders to death, refutes the notion that Spartans were unwilling to defend the Greeks, Herodotus reported that the priestess of the oracle at Delphi informed the Spartans at the commencement of the campaign that they would lose either their city or their king to the Persians. Leonidas ascended to the throne unexpectedly due to the premature deaths of his two elder brothers. He may have perceived a necessity to undertake an unforeseen and noble action to validate his kingship, or there may have been a prophecy indicating that such a virtuous monarch would rescue the city of Sparta. Nonetheless, his motivations remain inscrutable. The Boeotians' choice to stay and combat alongside Leonidas and his troops demonstrates that Spartans were not the sole Greek hoplites capable of valor in the face of insurmountable adversity. As the other Greeks withdrew, a messenger was dispatched by ship to the fleet at Artemisium to inform Eurybiades that the pass defense had concluded. Leonidas advanced the surviving hoplites to confront the adversary. The officers, some wielding whips to compel their hesitant warriors into combat, advocated for Xerxes' primary defense. The outcome was intense and sanguinary warfare, resulting in several Persian casualties, with some being crushed by their fellow soldiers. Initially, the hoplites engaged with their spears. However, they utilized their short swords upon their breakage. Two of Xerxes' half-brothers were among the losses, likely engaged in the front lines of the Persian forces. Ultimately, Leonidas succumbed, prompting the Spartans and Persians to engage in a deadly struggle for his remains. Upon Hydarne's eventual defeat, the Immortals descended from the Anapaea road and advanced towards the rear of the Greeks. The Spartans, their remaining helots and the Thespian contingent, relocated to a minor elevation behind the Phocian wall, executed a final resistance there, battling with helots, bare hands, and even teeth until the Persians retreated and eliminated the last of them with arrows. Some Thebans could detach and capitulate, but the Persian king was not. Churlish in triumph, he subjugated the Thebans and marked them with his royal insignia. Their city had capitulated to him, yet they allied with his adversaries. He ordered the body of Leonidas impaled and decapitated. So incensed was he by the Spartan king's disobedience. Herodotus states that Leonidas and his forces inflicted a loss of 20,000 men on Xerxes. The Greeks subsequently commemorated Leonidas and his deceased companions with a monument and various poetic epitaphs. One was dedicated to Megisthonoridia, a diviner from Acarnania in western Greece, who accompanied Lepitaphs. He was reputed to have foreseen impending calamity upon inspecting the sacrificial animals slaughtered in the early morning as Hydarnes and the Immortals traversed the mountains. Leonidas invited him to the retreat, but he declined, opting to send his son away instead. The poet Simonides authored the epitaph. In commemoration of the illustrious Megistias, who was killed by the Medes while they traversed the Spercheios River, it is noteworthy that the seer, despite foreseeing his imminent demise, chose not to forsake the Spartan leader. Ephialtes, the local individual who had directed the Persians through the mountains and behind the Greeks, escaped to Thessaly, apprehensive that the Spartans would exact retribution against him. A bounty was placed on a Greek individuals, and, although he was ultimately slain in a personal dispute by another man from Trachis, the Spartan authorities nonetheless compensated his murderer. The evacuation and seizure of Athens. The Greeks had acquired significant confidence at sea due to their prior victories and fortuitous circumstances. But the third day of combat proved unfavorable. Once more, their adversaries effectively surrounded them, leading to significant losses on both sides, a predicament the Greeks could not sustain. Upon receiving the distressing news from Thermopylae, the Greek fleet proceeded to the island of Salamis, just off the coast of Athens. This action was undertaken at the behest of the Athenians, whose populace was being relocated to Troezen in eastern Peloponnese and the islands of Salamis and Aegina to protect them from the Persians. The resolution to relinquish Athens and Attica to the Persians and evacuate the populace by sea was courageous, determined by a vote of the Athenian Citizen Assembly. This is a notable instance of Athenian democracy functioning when the majority opinion triumphed during a fervent debate amidst the looming Persian invasion. As the Persians progressed through northern Greece, the Athenians dispatched an official delegation to the renowned oracle of Apollo at Delphi to seek heavenly counsel. The standard protocol for consulting the oracle at Delphi involved sacred envoys delivering inquiries to the priestess of Apollo, known as the Pythia, who would then articulate the deity's responses, often comprising a series of cryptic utterances that required her interpretation for the petitioners. However, the envoys had hardly settled in Pythia's hallowed chamber when she abruptly exclaimed, "Wretched ones, why do you remain seated there? Abandon your residences and fortified stronghold, and escape to the farthest reaches of the earth," she commanded. This instruction was accompanied by grave warnings of imminent catastrophe for Athens and numerous other Greek cities due to Athens. Despite their astonishment at the outpouring, the two Athenian envoys remained committed to their mission, so they followed the counsel of a prominent Delphic official and submitted a more modest request for Apollo's help. Their alternative strategy produced a more favorable response. The Athenians received the oracle in verse, as was traditional. Despite her numerous entreaties and astute counsel, Pallas Athena cannot placate Olympian Zeus. "I shall address you again, having grown nearly unyielding." When all other territories enclosed by Cecrops and the sacred groves of divine Cithaeron are captured, heavenly Zeus grants Triton's progeny a wooden wall that alone endures to the advantage of you and your offspring. Kindly withdraw and disregard the mainland cavalry and infantry forces. We'll confront them again. Divine Salamis, you shall annihilate the progeny of women, whether Demeter is dispersed or assembled. As frequently occurred when governments received an official response from the Delphic oracle, a disagreement arose in Athens regarding interpreting these words. The allusions to Athena's inability to placate Zeus, the appropriation of territories inside Cecrops' domain, a legendary ruler of Athens, and the forests of Mount Cithaeron, next to Boeotia, implied that all of Attica would be inundated by the Persians. The mention of a wooden wall remaining unscathed appeared to some Athenians as an instruction to protect a specific location, presumably the Acropolis of Athens, with a wooden fence. However, Themistocles and his allies contended an alternative interpretation. They referenced the name of Salamis, an island in the Saronic Gulf west of Athens, and the reference to an army originating from the mainland, understanding the oracle as a directive to forsake the besieged region of Attica and withdraw to Salamis. They interpreted the wooden barricade as a metaphor for the wooden hulls of the Athenians' new fleet of warships. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, designated a certain season for the expected triumph. Their arguments succeeded, prompting the assembly to issue a decree requiring evacuation and fleet readiness. Troezen maintained an amended version of this edict. The subsequent excerpts are from it. The council and the people resolved. Themistocles, son of Neocles from the Dem Phrearioi, suggested dedicating the city to Athena and the other deities for its protection against the barbarians on behalf of the territory. All Athenians and foreign residents in Athens shall relocate their wives and children to Troezen, taking their elderly relatives and movable assets to Salamis. All remaining male Athenian citizens and resident foreigners will embark on the 200 ships to combat the barbarians for their own freedom and that of the Greeks. The Athenians enacted the decree prior to the Battle of Salamis in the summer of 480. They resolved to oppose the Persians and relied on the collaboration of the other Greeks. A prior order mandated the return of all banished Athenian citizens to Salamis. The political opponents of Themistocles were ostracized among the collected exiles. Ultimately, a small number of individuals stayed in the city, primarily the temple treasurers and priestesses of the cults on the Acropolis, which the enemy could not completely forsake. Some impoverished Athenians continued to believe that a physical wooden wall would protect them against the Persians, and fortified themselves on the Acropolis behind a wooden barrier. The Persians invaded Attica in early September of 480 and plundered Athens. They assumed a position on the Areopagus hill facing the entrance to the Acropolis and launched incendiary arrows at the wall. The Persians and Athenians, descendants of Pisistratos, attempted to persuade the defenders to capitulate. However, they were compelled to assault the fortress. They exterminated the remaining defenders, subsequently looted the temples, and ignited them. Xerxes dispatched a portion of his army to Phocis to devastate the land and plunder the towns. The Phocians retreated westward, as did numerous people of Delphi. However, Apollo's sanctuary was spared from looting by the Persians. Herodotus recounted that the officials at Delphi explained a narrative in which, when a Persian contingent neared, the remaining priests inquired of the deity what actions to take, to which he responded that he would safeguard his own. As the Poseido warriors ascended the short mountain route to the sanctuary, a thunderclap resonated, and 2 lightning bolts struck the cliffs above, causing 2 massive rocks to plummet, resulting in fatalities and instigating a panicked retreat among the survivors. An alternative account posits that Xerxes held a kind disposition towards the priests at Delphi, who endeavored to persuade the Greeks that resistance was in vain. So he explicitly exempted the shrine from looting. This type of respectful treatment was not uncommon for my plunder. The centers were situated in the provinces of the Persian Empire. The ships are preparing to conduct a census. During the evacuation of the Athenians to Salamis, the Greek navy engaged in combat in the harbour on the island's eastern side, while the commanders deliberated on whether to withdraw to the more defensible position at the Isthmus of Corinth. Numerous Peloponnesian nations had concluded that this small land corridor provided their optimal opportunity to counter the Persian incursion. Upon receiving news of the defeat at Thermopylae, the Spartans and other Peloponnesians, who had recently concluded the Olympic celebration, promptly convened at the Isthmus and commenced the construction of a defense wall at its narrowest point. The fleet commanders commenced deliberations over their alternatives as the Persians entered Attica. Following a day of unresolvable disputes, they concluded their discussions for the evening. The subsequent day, the Persian fleet arrived and positioned itself in the waters beyond the Bay of Phaleron, east of Salamis. Despite losses from storms and conflict, they had acquired reinforcements from Greeks compelled to join the Persian faction, resulting in an effective strength of almost 700 warships. The Greeks, possessing more than 300 ships, refrained from engaging in battle. The announcement of the Persian seizure of the Acropolis disrupted their discussions. A significant portion of the Persian army commenced their advance towards the Isthmus of Corinth. These factors prompted most commanders to forsake Salamis before the encroachment of the Persian fleet. Themistocles and the Athenians implored Eurybiades, the Spartan commander of the fleet. However, he maintained that the isthmus strategy was the most advantageous. He instructed the ship's captains to ready themselves for departure under the veil of darkness. However, later that evening, Eurybiades reconsidered, and the subsequent morning the Greek fleet remained at Salamis, prepared to engage the Persians. What prompted this alteration of strategy? Each fleet was cognizant of the other's whereabouts. Nonetheless, neither faction had direct visibility of their adversaries, and was sufficiently distanced to execute some actions without detection. The commander engaged in dialogue to acquire additional facts before executing their subsequent actions. From the Persian viewpoint, the important information was whether the Greek fleet would stay at Salamis or withdraw westward through the Megarian Straits. The Persians could ascertain this by studying the Greek position from the mainland across Salamis. Nonetheless, the little island of Agios Georgios would have obstructed their line of sight. And significantly, the Greeks could have discreetly departed under the cover of night if required. From the Greek perspective, the key inquiry was whether a feasible escape route existed for them. The Persian army was advancing along the shore of the Bay of Eleusis, and would soon seize the territory just north of Salamis, extending to the Megarian Straits. Should a segment of the Persian fleet navigate south of Salamis and access the straits from the west while the principal fleet stayed east, they would entirely isolate the Greeks from the Peloponnese. The Persians had previously attempted a comparable strategy. They had previously executed a comparable maneuver against the Greeks when positioned at Artemisium. Had a storm intervened, they could have ensnared the Greeks on that occasion. Herodotus asserts that this is exactly what the Persians executed. He attributes the responsibility for their deployment to Themistocles, asserting that he dispatched a reliable enslaved individual named Sikanos to Xerxes with a covert message, informing him that the Greeks were on the verge of departure and urging him to capitalize on the opportunity to assault them before their escape. He asserted that Xerxes would seize the opportunity to confront them, fragmented and ill-prepared for combat, achieving a simple triumph. Did Themistocles transmit a message to the adversary? And did they perceive it as authentic? The Athenians' subsequent banishment of Themistocles and their pursuit of sanctuary with the Persians raises skepticism regarding the narrative. His political adversaries may have fabricated the messaging strategy to tarnish his reputation. Ultimately, it remains unclear if the message had any impact. The Persians undoubtedly commenced positioning their ships that evening. Nonetheless, whether their actions were prompted by Themistocles' envoy, or if the king resolved to initiate an offensive that evening, remains contentious. A flotilla of 200 Egyptian vessels was dispatched around Salamis's western flank to obstruct the isthmus passage via the Megarian Straits. They deployed an additional squadron with directives to patrol the southern and eastern approaches to the island. Simultaneously, the remainder of the fleet advanced into the constricted straits between Salamis and the mainland, approaching the Greek defences. A contingent of elite Persian infantry was deployed to the little island of Citaleia to secure it, expecting ships to be stranded there during the conflict. The Persian ships would have required considerable time to navigate from Phaleron to the strait's entrance. Thus, even if they commenced their movement at nightfall, some may not have assumed their positions until midnight. Most captains were unfamiliar with the waterways surrounding Salamis, and Herodotus states that these maneuvers were executed silently, to keep the Greeks oblivious to them. The Persians likely aimed to expel the Greeks from the confined straits along the island's eastern flank, and into the broader expanse of the Bay of Eleusis. The Greeks were not anticipated to confront the primary force of Xerxes' navy. Instead, they were supposed to retreat westward and navigate past the lesser Egyptian contingent. Despite Themistocles' communication, Xerxes' commanders were compelled to deploy his ships before dawn to secure their ambush before nightfall, which would have facilitated the Greeks' escape. Consequently, it is not inherently true that Sikanos' words incited Xerxes to take action. The Persians would have required adherence to the same schedule in its absence, as their mainland observers and any potential scout vessels at sea might not have detected the Greeks if they chose to flee under the concealment of darkness or twilight. By obstructing potential escape routes as night descended, they guaranteed that this could not occur. The Greeks obtained two accounts of these movements. One originated from the crew of a different Greek vessel that defected from the Persians, specifically from the island of Tanos. Eurybiades and his commanders doubted their loyalty following the disclosure of the Persian strategy. Later in the evening, one of the Athenian exiles, Aristodemus, came on a reconnaissance mission with the information that the Persians were encircling the Greek position, making the escape to the isthmus impossible without engaging in combat. Themistocles reiterated his insistence on confronting the Persian fleet, contending that the straits on the eastern side of Salamis would provide a more advantageous battleground than the Bay of Eleusis, or the expansive waters surrounding the isthmus. The threat Themistocles and his fellow Athenians issued to completely forsake the other Greeks and relocate their families to Italy may have significantly influenced the debates. The Athenian vessels constituted the Greek fleet's predominant force, making their involvement crucial in any naval engagement with the Persians. Given the circumstances, it is hardly unexpected that Eurybiades reversed his decision and consented to command the Greek fleet in combat. The Persians' deployment of their ships before the Greek departure extinguished any possibility of a clandestine escape under the veil of night. The last remaining path of action was to engage in battle at sea, relying on the assumption that the Persian vessels could not leverage their numerical advantage in the comparatively confined waters. The Battle of Salamis. In great anticipation of a resplendent triumph, King Xerxes established an observation station to observe the combat. It was situated across from Salamis, providing a clear view of Psytalea, where a contingent of Persian forces had disembarked overnight. Instead of observing his fleet's ultimate victory over the Greeks, Xerxes witnessed a maritime catastrophe before him. The several ethnic groups of the Persian fleet were arranged in multiple rows across the narrow canal, with the Phoenicians positioned on the right wing closest to Xerxes, and the Ionians on the left, nearest to Salamis. As they advanced deeper into the channel, their vessels were so congested and disordered that maintaining formation proved impossible. The men had been awake all night and were fatigued. Also, a formidable surge emerged, complicating the ship's progress. Themistocles had a profound understanding of the local maritime circumstances and foreseen this eventuality. He appears to have convinced the other Greek commanders to postpone confronting the Persians until they were evidently in disarray. This elucidates the perceived withdrawal of the Greeks as noted by Herodotus before the initial confrontation, which can be construed as a transition from a static alignment of vessels to a more dynamic formation, with the Athenian and Aeginetan ships on the flanks spearheading the Greek assault to penetrate the Persian lines, and collide with individual ships as they attempted to navigate. By their commanders' expectations, the Persians likely perceived the Greek ships as fleeing. In his work, The Persians, the tragic playwright Aeschylus references a signal conveyed to the Greek fleet by a trumpet, maybe a pre-arranged cue for the commanders to advance and engage. The Greek fleet employed signals to synchronize its maneuvers at Artemisium. Both parties preordained the strategies for the conflict to a certain degree. Nevertheless, as with all conflicts, once hostilities began, following a predetermined strategy became impractical, necessitating the captains of each vessel to make spontaneous judgments. The primary option taken by the commanders of Xerxes was to retreat from the advancing Greeks, resulting in more disarray as they confronted their vessels while attempting to advance and impress the great king with their capabilities. Amidst the ensuing turmoil, the commanders of the Greek vessels motivated their more invigorated crews and launched a highly successful offensive. Herodotus's later description of the war primarily consists of anecdotes regarding the deeds of various individuals and parties. Similar to several narratives in Herodotus's history, the accounts are interpretations of events relayed to him by certain groups or individuals, resulting in significant prejudice. Hence, we lack a comprehensive understanding of the conflict. Herodotus asserts that the 70 Corinthian ships suddenly reversed course and retreated to the Bay of Eleusis. The alleged shameful retreat to the north, which Herodotus depicts as an Athenian defamation of the Corinthians, may have been a strategic maneuver to confront the Egyptian squadron and avert its assault on the Greeks from behind. The Corinthians asserted that their vessels did not confront the Egyptians, but returned to the conflict and vindicated themselves and other Greeks. One of the most vivid anecdotes pertains to Artemisia, the sovereign of Halicarnassos, the birthplace of Herodotus under Persian dominion. She commanded her own vessel and was at the forefront of the Persian fleet. As an Athenian trireme approached her, she attempted to flee but encountered obstructions from other Persian vessels. Desperate, she directed her helmsman to collide with one of the vessels under the command of the king of Calydna in Aeacia. The vessel submerged, resulting in the demise of the king and his whole crew. The Athenian captain, in pursuit, presumed that Artemisia's ship was allied with him, and altered his route toward another Persian vessel. Xerxes and his advisers observed the event and identified Artemisia's vessel by its flag, mistakenly believing that she had destroyed a Greek trireme, which garnered the king's esteem. It is also stated regarding Xerxes, "My soldiers have behaved like women and my women like soldiers." A separate narrative pertains to the Persian soldiers stationed on the island of Citolea. They were positioned there expecting the majority of the Greek fleet to be propelled northward and westward from the island. The proximate coast of Salamis rendered them susceptible to assault, severing their connection to their vessels. Aristodemus, elected as one of the Athenian generals following his premature return from exile, requisitioned several small boats and directed a contingent of Athenian hoplites to the island. The Athenians massacred Xerxes' top forces, including 3 of his nephews, before his very eyes. The Athenians exterminated or apprehended other Persians who succeeded in reaching the shore from their sinking vessels along the Salamis shoreline. Certain Phoenician vessels near the king's location experienced fewer difficulties in progressing toward the Greeks, and engaged in the conflict earlier than the Ionians on the opposing flank. Their primary adversaries were the Athenians, who defeated them and forced numerous Phoenician seamen ashore, precisely where Xerxes observed from his regal chariot. They approached the king to seek pardon, asserting that the Ionians had betrayed them and instigated the disarray of the Persian navy. Regrettably for them, while in the king's presence, an Ionian vessel from Samothrake was observed colliding with an Athenian trireme, thereafter being struck by an Aeginetan ship. The marines on the Ionian ship promptly boarded and seized the Aeginetan vessel, demonstrating their allegiance and bravery to Xerxes. Enraged, the monarch commanded the execution of the Phoenician dissenters. As the day concluded, the Persian fleet withdrew in disarray to the Bay of Phaleron, losing almost 200 ships and failing to dislodge the Greeks from Salamis. The Greeks had lost approximately 40 ships and had routed the enemy back to their anchorage in chaos. The unforeseen triumph prompted numerous individuals to perceive it as a manifestation of heavenly influence, a realization of the Delphic oracle bestowed to the Athenians earlier that year. Accounts rapidly disseminated celestial manifestations amongst the conflict, including an enigmatic luminescence emanating from Demeter's sanctuary at Eleusis and the auditory presence of a sacred choir intoning prayers. The narrative further developed that King Xerxes deserted his army and retreated to Asia. Despite the advancing year and deteriorating weather conditions, Xerxes continued the campaign for several additional days. He endeavored to construct a further bridge of boats over the straits to Salamis, and commanded his navy to ready itself for subsequent operations. The Persians possessed many more vessels than the Greeks, prompting the Egyptian squadron to reunite with the main fleet, upon seeing that the Greeks would not succumb to the ambush. The headquarters of the Hellenic League, the Temple of Poseidon on the Isthmus, was attained following the army's crossing of Megara. They pillaged and incinerated it, advancing towards the Greek strongholds further west, without engaging them. Xerxes has now reversed his decision, and the Persian fleet has set sail toward the coasts of Asia Minor. The Greeks chased them to Andros, but abandoned the pursuit and returned to Salamis. In the interim, Xerxes led his army through Boeotia and into Thessaly and Macedonia, where it could winter in areas with ample provisions of food and fodder. A segment of the army accompanied the great king back to Persia. The Greeks contended that Xerxes had succumbed to fear and retreated to his homeland. Yet he possessed alternative motivations for withdrawing and returning to Persia. The effort was partially successful. Although his navy lacked distinction, his infantry triumphed in the initial major confrontation, albeit with considerable losses. They had eliminated a key enemy leader and seized control of the city of the despised Athenians. Despite relocating to Thessaly, his empire expanded westward, rendering his presence unnecessary for the remainder of the campaign, which could be resumed the subsequent year. A solar eclipse transpired at the beginning of October. This may indicate that Ahura Mazda, Xerxes' patron deity, was disinclined to intervene for the time being. He had significant political motivations to avoid prolonged absence from the western peripheries of his empire, including the risk of insurrection in several crucial satrapies. In 479, Xerxes quelled a significant insurrection in Babylonia, and reports of this upheaval likely influenced his decision to depart from Greece before the complete pacification of the newly acquired regions. The Battle of Plataea. The Persian commander stationed in Greece was Mardonios, a cousin and son-in-law of Xerxes. His deputy was Artabazos, who subsequently became a satrap of Phrygia in Western Asia Minor. Mardonius was compelled by logistical necessities to withdraw to Thessaly and Macedonia for the winter. His ultimate aim was to subjugate the remaining Greek nations. To achieve this, he needed to invade the Peloponnese. The fortifications at the Isthmus of Corinth were finalized by early 479, establishing it as a powerful stronghold. Mardonios sought to ready himself for the impending return of the Persian fleet. Thus, in the spring of 479, he resolved to attempt to fracture the Hellenic League by enticing the Athenians to Medes. By eliminating their naval forces from the conflict, he would significantly enhance his prospects of defeating the remaining Greek vessels and deploying Persian troops beyond the isthmus defences. He utilized Alexander, the king of Macedon, to initiate the overtures because of his status as a subject of the great king, and his official recognition as a friend and benefactor of the Athenian people, partly stemming from his provision of timber for the construction of the Athenian fleet. Mardonios proposed to secure Xerxes' consent for the Athenians to maintain their territory, acquire additional land at the expense of other Greeks, and have their temples reconstructed at the king's expense. Upon learning of this development, the Spartans promptly dispatched their envoys to Athens to implore the Athenians to remain in the alliance. Notwithstanding the allure of Mardonios' proposal, the Athenians remained steadfast and conveyed to Alexander their unwavering refusal to negotiate peace with Xerxes. Simultaneously, they implored the Spartans to vacate the Peloponnese, safeguard Attica, or re-evaluate their stance. No location north of the isthmus could accommodate the Persian army, presenting a dilemma for the Spartans and other Peloponnesians of the Hellenic League. They would need to confront a battle on more exposed terrain against what was likely to be a superior force. The Spartans designated Pausanias, a nephew of Leonidas, as regent for his juvenile son, Pleistakos, who was insufficiently mature to lead an army. Leotychides, their other king, commanded the Hellenic fleet, which convened at Aegina for the impending campaign. During the summer, Mardonios advanced his forces southward, traversing Boeotia en route to Athens. Recognizing that assistance from the Peloponnese would be delayed, the Athenians executed an additional evacuation to Salamis. Mardonios postponed the sacking of Athens to give the Athenians an additional chance to accept his peace proposal. Herodotus states that when the proposal was reiterated to the Athenian Council of 500, just one individual recommended that it be sent to the citizen assembly for a vote, and he was subsequently stoned to death by his peers. Their envoys expressed grievances to the Spartans on their compelled alliance with the Persians. This produced the intended outcome, resulting in the formation of a substantial army to confront Mardonios. The army that accompanied Pausanias from the Peloponnese comprised several thousand perioikoi, numerous additional Peloponnesian hoplites, and 5,000 Spartan citizens, constituting the largest Spartan contingent to undertake such a march. Mardonios perceived the Greeks' exit from the Peloponnese as a favorable substitute for an Athenian betrayal. He relocated his army to Thebes on the plains of Boeotia, which were sufficiently level to leverage his numerical superiority and optimize the deployment of his cavalry. A substantial Athenian contingent and other allied factions allied with Pausanias. The Greek army ultimately entrenched itself in a formidable position on the northern inclines of Mount Kithaeron, confronting the Persians, who erected a fortified encampment across the river Asopos on the expansive plain, more conducive to their cavalry operations. The Spartans and Tegeans occupied the right flank. The remaining Peloponnesians were positioned in the center, while the Athenians and Megarians were stationed on the left flank. Herodotus states that the total number of Greek hoplites was 38,700, over 4 times the amount that fought at Thermopylae. Numerous helots accompanied the Spartans, and many light infantry from other Greek states. Mardonios commanded a larger force than Pausanias, with several thousand troops from Thebes and other Boeotian cities, not including the Plataeans, who allied with the Greeks. His army possessed significantly more cavalry than the Greeks, which he employed to disrupt Pausanias and his troops' supply lines. On one occasion, his troops seized an entire Greek supply convoy and incapacitated the Greeks' primary source of potable water, a spring known as Gargaphia. The cavalry incursions persisted for almost 2 weeks, progressively depleting the Greek supply lines, compelling Pausanias to relocate his army nearer to Plataea, where water and abundant food were available. Pausanias resolved to execute a nocturnal withdrawal and dispatched communications to the several units of his army to retreat under the veil of darkness. The left flank of the Greek army withdrew nearly to the walls of Plataea. However, there was disarray among certain Spartan and Peloponnesian units. As recounted by Herodotus, a Spartan commander categorically declined to retreat, so impeding the advance of the others, resulting in their considerable distance from the objective as morning arrived and the Persian cavalry resumed their assaults. Mardonios was informed by his scouts that the Greeks were in retreat, prompting him to launch an attack without adequate organization. Mardonios's Persian infantry confronted the Spartans and Tegeans, their closest adversaries, while Pausanias dispatched a messenger to call for reinforcements. However, the Boeotians and other Greeks allied with Mardonios obstructed this effort by swiftly crossing the river Asopos to assault the left flank of Pausanias' forces, which included the Athenians. The Spartans and Tegeans were left to confront Mardonios' primary force independently. Despite the unfavorable odds, the Greeks were superior in close quarters battle, with the Spartans particularly adept at disciplined unit fighting. After an intense confrontation, the Greeks effectively repelled their opponents, leading to the demise of Mardonios. This incited widespread terror within the Persian ranks, as soldiers hastily retreated to the safety of their encampment. On the opposite side of the battlefield, the hoplites from Athens, Philaius, and Megara were initially besieged by Boeotian and Thessalian cavalry, but ultimately engaged the main contingent of Theban infantry and defeated them, causing the Thebans to retreat. The Tegeans and Spartans were momentarily hindered from assaulting the Persian camp, fortified by a robust stockade. However, the arrival of the Athenians facilitated their breach of the defences, acquiring considerable plunder and several captives. Artabazos retreated with the remaining Persian forces, numbering approximately 40,000, without staying to retrieve any remains. including that of Mardonios. He advanced directly from Greece and proceeded to Asia Minor. The Greek deaths were minimal, totaling only 91 Spartans, 16 Tegeans, and 52 Athenians. Nevertheless, the Megarians and Phliasians endured significant losses due to the Boeotian cavalry, resulting in 600 fatalities on the plain. This decisive victory of the Hellenic League eliminated the Persian threat to the Greek mainland. 11 days post-battle, the triumphant Greeks advanced towards Thebes, the Greek city that had served as a significant stronghold for the Persians following Thermopylae, and had substantially supported Mardonios's forces. The Athenians were especially eager to hold their Boeotian neighbours accountable for abandoning the Hellenic cause. Following a 20-day siege, the Thebans capitulated, presenting their foremost citizens, who they deemed most culpable for collusion with the Persians. Pausanias dissolved his army, sent the Theban captives to Corinth, and executed them. Pausanias was regarded as the hero of the moment. He received 1/10 of the spoils from the Persian camp, comprising numerous gold and silver artifacts, luxurious tents, and various equipment for the Persian aristocracy. A significant number of non-combatants were included among the detainees, comprising enslaved people, concubines, and various attendants. Pausanias instructed Mardonios's chefs to prepare a traditional Persian meal in their master's opulently adorned tent. In addition, he presented a typical Spartan dinner for comparison. He dryly commented to the other commanders on the absurdity of the Persians, who possessed abundant luxury, yet attempted to exploit the impoverished Greeks. The states of the Hellenic League gave a golden tripod to Apollo at Delphi to commemorate their victory. It was positioned atop a bronze column intricately sculpted to resemble 3 interwoven serpents, symbols of Apollo. In the 4th century AD, Constantine appropriated this monument to embellish the hippodrome of his newly established city, Constantinople. Currently, the inferior segments of the snakes are still observable. The Spartans inscribed the names of the Greek nations whose soldiers battled the Persians onto the coils of the snakes, while Pausanias inscribed his name on the base, asserting his entitlement as the primary commander of the Greeks. The Battle of Mycale. The failure of Xerxes' fleet at Salamis incited certain cities in the northern Aegean to revolt against the Persians. The most significant among these were Olynthos and Plataea. The army of Artabazos, having sent 60,000 troops through Macedonia and Thrace to escort Xerxes back to Asia Minor, besieged both locations. A resolute attack resulted in the capture of Olynthos, and the slaughter of its inhabitants dissuaded subsequent uprisings. Artabazos was compelled to besiege Plataea for 3 months before surrendering and reuniting with Mardonios, as the assault proved more challenging. Nonetheless, the Greeks believed there was a significant possibility of persuading further Ionian compatriots to defect from the Persians, prompting them to sail to Samos, where Xerxes' navy had wintered, accompanied by a small army to monitor the Ionian Greeks. The Greek fleet was much reduced compared to the one that engaged at Salamis, owing to the dedication of numerous troops to the defense of the mainland. Herodotus states that merely 110 ships assembled at Aegina in the spring under the leadership of the Spartan king Leotychides. Themistocles was less esteemed by the Athenians than he anticipated, likely due to the widespread loss of homes and property following the Persian invasion of Athens. Consequently, he did not command the tiny Athenian contingent led by his opponent, Xanthippus. Following the calamity at Salamis, the Persian commander Tigranes, a cousin of Xerxes, was reluctant to engage the Greeks in naval combat. He returned the finest ships from Phoenicia to their home ports and disembarked the crews of the remaining vessels on the mainland promontory of Mycale across from Samos. They reinforced their campsite and anticipated the adversary. Leotychides disembarked his men and commanded the Greek forces against the Persian strongholds. Upon nearing the Persians, he urged the Ionians among them to desert, resulting in the disarmament of the Samians, whose ownership of a substantial island residence may have rendered them more predisposed to resist the great king than those residing on the mainland. The routes traversing the mountain and diverging from the primary Persian walls, which offered a potential escape, were secured by Greeks from Miletos, whose allegiance was unquestionable. Leotychides and his forces advanced towards the Persian encampment from the east and initiated an assault. Following extended combat outside the encampment, the Persians withdrew behind the stockade, which was subsequently broken, aided by the Samians confined within. Many Persians adhered to their designated escape route, ultimately arriving at the satrapal city of Sardis, where their commander, Tigranes, perished. This triumph on adversarial ground incited broader insurrection among the Ionians and posed a quandary for the Hellenic League. How could the Hellenic League protect the rebellious Ionians from such a considerable distance and in the presence of the Persian satraps? The Peloponnesians suggested repatriating the Ionians to Greece and allocating the cities of the Greeks, who had collaborated with the Persians. The Athenians vehemently opposed this, and ultimately Leotychides was compelled to allow the islanders, including the inhabitants of Samos, Lesbos and Chios, into the League. They subsequently navigated to the Hellespont to dismantle Xerxes' bridges. However, a tempest had already rendered them inoperative. Leotychides and the Peloponnesians returned home, while Xanthippos and the Athenians stayed at the Hellespont and captured the city of Sestos following a siege. The Athenians' focus transitioned from defending Greece to waging war against the Persian king's territory. Among the numerous figures depicted in Herodotus's history is the Spartan citizen Aristodemus, who perished at the Battle of Plataea. Through the accounts of Herodotus and various other sources, we may delineate his life and acquire significant insights into the Spartan ethos. Aristodemus was born to a Spartan couple in one of the 5 towns that constituted the city of Sparta, likely between 520 and 515 BCE. The legendary progenitor of the initial 2 Spartan monarchs influenced his nomenclature. A Spartan father did not inherently possess the right to rear his sons. Upon their birth, he was required to present them to a cohort of older people to evaluate the infant and determine whether he exhibited physical normalcy and the potential for robust health. Children who did not pass this check were confined to a secluded gorge on Mount Taygetos and abandoned to perish. The lads that successfully passed the test were intentionally hardened from a young age by wine bathing, a diet of simple cuisine, and acclimatization to severe conditions. At 5 years old, a youngster was separated from his parents and placed in a barracks with other boys of the same age. He remained in this group until he attained adulthood, approximately 19 or 20, and was granted admission to the ranks of Spartan citizens as one of the equate. The upbringing of Aristodemus. The agoge, a structured training regimen, governed the education of Spartan boys to equip them for their future responsibilities as citizen soldiers. It thus focused on the abilities and traits deemed suitable for a hopper. The focus was on discipline, conformity, collective values, and physical and mental resilience. Singing and dancing were mandatory, emphasizing synchronization and memorization of the choral poetry of Tyrtaeus. Commencing at age 10, athletic training, singing, and dancing were conducted competitively, featuring regular awards for the top performers and assessments to ascertain their strength for advancement to subsequent levels. The young guys donned a solitary cloak for weather protection and were barefoot. They frequently engaged in exercise unclothed, similar to the Spartan females, who, although not subjected to the agoge, were reared to be robust and resilient, ensuring the birth of strong, healthy offspring. Food was minimal and basic to promote a slender body and acclimate the gadgets to operate effectively in hunger. This also incentivized children to pilfer supplementary food, which was condoned, as it fostered stealth and resourcefulness. However, they encountered harsh repercussions if their negligence resulted in detection. A renowned tale recounts the incident of a Spartan youngster apprehended by an adult while attempting to conceal a fox within his cloak. The fox gnawed through the boy's abdomen. However, he stayed silent, apprehensive of disclosing its presence, ultimately resulting in his demise. Older males, some of whom formed strong friendships with specific youths, oversaw all phases of the agoge. This technique frequently resulted in pederasty. However, it was promoted as a means of assimilating the boys with the older men, who would ultimately become permanent members of a session or citizens' barracks. The responsibilities of a Spartan. Upon successfully completing all examinations, Aristodemus was elected to a cystitis. He was now a complete Spartan citizen and had to be prepared to be summoned for service in a Spartan army, typically consisting of males aged 20 to 40. Upon reaching his mid-20s, he was obligated to acquire a spouse. His selection of a partner would have been mostly autonomous. However, it likely necessitated the endorsement of the village elders, and the girl's father would have needed to consent to him as a suitable husband. Men often married women approximately 5 years their junior. Than those individuals, the objective of marriage was to provide additional offspring for the Spartan polity, hence sustaining the population of Spartans. An intimate emotional connection between spouses was deemed unnecessary. Until 30, Aristodemus resided in the barracks with his session colleagues rather than cohabiting with his wife. His trips to his wife were intended solely in darkness and infrequently. Nonetheless, the anticipation was that they would culminate in pregnancy. Should they remain childless, the assumption would have been for him to reject his wife as infertile and seek another partner. Aristodemus sired at least one offspring, a son, and perhaps had other progeny. Upon reaching 30, Aristodemus was regarded as a complete Spartan citizen. He could now reside in a dwelling with his spouse and family. He would oversee boys and young men and engage in military training with his comrades. The senior Spartans were anticipated to serve as exemplars for the youth, embodying androgathia, or manly virtue. An opportune moment for Aristodemus to use his training and exhibit his masculinity arose in 480, when he advanced to confront the Persians at Thermopylae. Aristodemus often anticipated participating in warfare alongside the other adult males of his community. Organized in a regiment of up to 1,000 individuals, known as lochs. Thermopylae was significant because of a major religious festival, and the departure of the Spartan army before its conclusion was deemed disrespectful to the deities. King Leonidas commanded the Greek army and obtained a unique religious exemption to recruit 300 men as bodyguards. Typically, he would have been sent young men in their 20s. However, considering the probability of defeat against the formidable Persian army, he opted for older men who had previously fathered at least one son to sustain the Spartan ranks. Aristodemus was selected and undoubtedly regarded it as a significant honor to be distinguished in this manner. Aristodemus at Thermopylae. At the Thermopylae Pass, the Greeks had the opportunity to contemplate Xerxes' formidable force while awaiting the Persians' advance. At this moment, a local Trachinian man likely commented that the sheer volume would obscure the sun when the Persians eventually discharged their arrows. Dionysius, a Spartan, remarked to his companions, "What our companion from Trachis conveys is splendid news. If the Medes obscure the sun, we shall engage in battle in the shadow." It is probable that during their wait, the Spartans sang some of Tyrtaeus' most motivational songs. King Leonidas allegedly lauded Tyrtaeus' poetry for motivating the youth to engage in valorous combat. This excerpt from Fragment 12 clearly illustrates how Tyrtaeus highlighted the hoplite virtues of courage, solidarity, and the willingness to give one's life for others. In warfare, an individual is esteemed only if he can withstand the sight of blood and death and participate in a hand-to-hand fight with adversaries. This represents excellence, the pinnacle accolade attainable by audacious youth. All citizens of the state profit when an individual stands resolutely in the forefront, maintaining his position and unwaveringly dismissing the notion of disgraceful retreat, jeopardizing his life with courage while inspiring those around him. Such an individual commands great respect in warfare. He rapidly repels the enemy's spear formations, and his fervor alters the trajectory of the conflict. The individual who perishes in the forefront bestows honor upon his father, companions, and city. His torso, armor, and embossed shield are repeatedly penetrated by frontal strikes. Individuals of all ages grieve for him, and the entire state is bereaved by his passing. He indicates his grave, his offspring, and his complete lineage. The name and renown of his valor endure eternally, rendering him immortal, even in death, regardless of whatever man the war god Ares claims, as he valiantly defends his homeland and progeny. This passage outlines the events between the Spartans and Leonidas at Thermopylae's pass, except for two individuals. Due to their serious eye infections, the monarch commanded Aristodemus and Eurytos to depart from the 300, as they could not engage in combat. Their Helot attendants escorted them to the adjacent village of Alpenos for recuperation. As the bulk of the Greek army withdrew, dispatched by Leonidas before the Persians encircled them, the two Spartans debated whether it was their obligation to return and perish alongside their unseen colleagues, or to remain out of the conflict as instructed. Eurytos ultimately compelled his Helot to guide. Notwithstanding the Helot's successful escape, Aristodemus swiftly returned to the fray and perished. Aristodemus complied with directives and maintained his post, so he survived the conflict. Another Spartan, Pantites, survived as he had been dispatched to Thessaly as a messenger prior to the commencement of the war, and by the time of his return, it had concluded. The Trembler. Leonidas and his 298 deceased Spartans were lauded as heroic figures, whilst Aristodemus and Pantites were scorned upon their return to Sparta. It was widely held that authentic Spartans would have perished alongside their fellow warriors. Aristodemus vehemently believed that the presumption of their cowardice was an affront to his masculine honor. The epitaph for the Spartans who perished with Leonidas at Thermopylae would have amplified his suffering. It was engraved on a monument established at the location of their ultimate resistance. Stranger, inform the Spartans that we rest here in compliance with their directives. Leonidas commanded Aristodemus to withdraw from the battlefield, and he adhered to the king's orders. The sole divergence of opinion with Eurytos, who had defied his commands and returned to Thermopylae, prompted the other Spartans to reproach Aristodemus for not acting similarly. Some proposed that they had dispatched him and Pantites as envoys, intentionally postponing their return to evade the confrontation. Both were designated as cowards. The gravest allegation against a genuine Spartan was the charge of cowardice. Tresantes, or tremblers, had deserted the enemy, or declined to engage in combat with their fellow soldiers. They were loathed for embodying the antithesis of the quintessential Spartan hoplite. Tremblers were mandated to don coloured patches on their crimson cloaks for identification, and they were ostracized by the other equals. Their companions from the session completely disregarded them, even to the extent of refusing to communicate. They could not sustain any mode of communication. They were prohibited from holding public offices, obtaining justice for insults or injuries, or forming legal partnerships with other Spartans. No Spartan would permit his daughter to wed a trembler, and Aristodemus must have been apprehensive about the future of his progeny, as no one would like to unite their children with the offspring of a trembler. Pantes found the burden unbearable and committed suicide, whereas Aristodemus persevered through the humiliation, anticipating a chance to rehabilitate his reputation. Aristodemus at Plataea. The opportunity arose the subsequent year. The ephors summoned Aristodemus to accompany the regent Pausanias's forces at Plataea, notwithstanding his timidity and estrangement from the equals. The Spartans sought to assemble a substantial army, perhaps dispatching nearly all residents under 40, retaining just the eldest men to defend Sparta against a potential Messenian Helot insurrection. Aristodemus advanced with the soldiers of his locks. However, he would still have been ignored by them. His sole companion would have been his Helot attendant, responsible for transporting his equipment and preparing his meals. As he neared the plain of Boeotia, where the Persians were encamped, his sole objective was to demonstrate that he was not a coward, but a genuine Spartan. A notable act of valor could bestow upon him national recognition and rehabilitate his reputation, even at the expense of his life. It would be worthwhile for the benefit of his family. Pausanias stationed his forces on a hill ridge adjacent to Plataea, although successive days of cavalry assaults compelled him to withdraw under the cover of night. The Persians assaulted the Spartans before dawn, initially employing cavalry, followed by infantry, who stopped within bow range and discharged arrows from behind a barrier of wicker shields. Pausanias was required to engage the Persians, although he postponed, anticipating reinforcements and favorable omens. The commander, accompanied by the two ephors and his official diviners, typically sacrificed a goat before the Spartan ranks advanced to confront the enemy, examining its entrails for favorable omens from the gods regarding the battle's victory. The army might advance when the ephors and diviners declared the omens auspicious. Upon his initial attempt, Pausanias encountered adverse omens, prompting him to instruct the Spartans to delay. The men were progressively impatient as the Persians unleashed arrows against them, prompting Pausanias to perform repeated sacrifices. Still, he refrained from issuing the command to advance. Upon becoming fatigued, Aristodemus departed from his locks and engaged the Persians without awaiting commands. To his left, the Tegeans advanced rapidly. Pausanias seized this time to instruct the Spartans to advance, signifying that the omens were now propitious. Aristodemus presumably eliminated several Persians before his own death. The Spartans and Tegeans repelled the Persians, eliminated their commander Mardonios, and secured victory. Aristodemus undoubtedly exhibited valor during his assault on the Persian forces, and Herodotus regarded him as the most courageous individual of that day. Yet the Spartans held a differing opinion. They refused to recognize him as a state hero, contending that he had deliberately chosen to take his own life. He demonstrated the valor of a genuine Spartan, but fell short of their stringent requirements of discipline and obedience. Despite lacking a tomb and his offspring being highlighted for future generations, he attained enduring renown through Herodotus's investigations. The Persians in an Athenian tragedy. Biannually, the Athenians convened at the theatre of Dionysus to observe and partake in choral competitions. By the early 5th century, these performances had transformed into dramatic plays featuring meticulously crafted scripts that examined sad or comedic themes. Numerous exemplary works have been preserved and continue to captivate audiences approximately 2.5 millennia after their initial presentations. Tragic plays often derived their narratives from the extensive traditions of Greek mythology. However, occasionally, a playwright would situate his work in a modern context. In 493, the Athenian tragedian Phrynikos premiered the capture of Miletos at the theatre of Dionysus in Athens. The drama centered on the recent conquest of this significant Ionian city by the Persians and the subsequent slaughter or slavery of numerous inhabitants was profoundly emotional, evoking tears from the audience. The Athenians, compelled by this emotional response, imposed a fine on Phrynikos and mandated that his play should never be performed again. The Athenians acknowledged that the destiny of Miletos may be their own, if they opposed the Persians. Herodotus states that Phrynikos was penalized for recalling their adversities and the imminent danger posed by the Persian Empire. The text of the play has not been preserved. In 472, 8 years post the Battle of Salamis, the renowned tragedian Aeschylus, who had participated in Salamis and whose brother Cynaegirus perished in the fight of Marathon, presented a highly acclaimed play named The Persians. Aeschylus achieved a significant victory, securing first place in the competition. The Choragos responsible for financing the show was Pericles, the offspring of the Athenian general Xanthippos. This play's text reveals a portion of the process by which the significance of the Persian Wars was established for subsequent generations. The play's dramatic action unfolds in the palace of the Persian king Xerxes, while his courtiers and family await word of his campaign against the Greeks. Xerxes is shown as an impulsive and authoritarian figure, whose hubris and aspirations would culminate in calamity for the Persians. This scenario exemplifies an Athenian tragedy, yet the play is distinctive among extant instances due to its contemporaneous subject matter and its narrative perspective from the Persian court. In the subsequent excerpt, lines 230 to 45, Atossa, the widow of King Darius and mother of King Xerxes, inquires of the chorus, consisting of aged Persian men, to provide further information regarding the destination of her son's campaign. She has experienced a dream that portends calamity. Subsequently, a messenger arrives bearing word of her son's defeat at Salamis. Atossa: I seek to ascertain the geographical location of Athens, my friends. Chorus: distant, as far as the horizon where the sun descends. Atossa: is this the city my son intends to annihilate? Chorus: thus, he shall render all of Greece subordinate to the monarch. Atossa: do they own a substantial number of soldiers in their armies? Chorus: indeed, their army possessed sufficient strength to inflict significant damage upon the Medes. Atossa: what other information exists regarding them? Is the city affluent? Chorus: they possess a spring of silver, the earth's wealth. Atossa: do they equip themselves with bows and arrows? Chorus: not at all. They engage in close combat with spears and use shields. Atossa: who is their commander and leader? The army belonging to them. Chorus: they are neither the enslaved individuals nor the subjects of any man. Atossa: how can they endure an adversary's assault? Chorus: sufficiently capable to have obliterated the illustrious army of Darius. Atossa: what you convey is distressing news for the parents of our soldiers. This succinct dialogue illustrates that the Athenians perceived themselves as the emancipators of the Greeks, owing to the valor of their hoplites at Marathon and the prowess of their navy, constructed from the revenues of their silver mines at Salamis. They regarded themselves as superior to the Persians due to their lack of subjugation to one sovereign. The perspective that the Greek victories in the Persian Wars represented a triumph of Athenian democracy and liberty over Persian monarchy. And subjugation obscures the reality that the Athenians had numerous allies whose governments were decidedly undemocratic and who were willing to subjugate other Greeks. Nonetheless, it was a compelling concept and has persisted in shaping all ensuing dialogues regarding the broader implications of the Persian Wars. Persepolis, the zenith of Persian regal architecture. The Greeks were astonished by their success in vanquishing the army and navy of the great king of Persia. The Greeks had become accustomed to the belief that the Persians had substantial money and power, making their extensive empire seemingly invincible. This was mostly an image that the Persian kings had intentionally cultivated. In the 5th century Near East, the Persian metropolis of Persepolis appeared both distant and remarkably impressive. For the majority, it required several months of journey to arrive in the center of the Persian Empire, and few actually witnessed it. Yet, Persepolis epitomized the zenith of Achaemenid imperial construction. Darius was the monarch who initiated the construction at Persepolis. He sought a new capital for the dynasty he had established. Xerxes, his son, perpetuated his endeavors, whereas Artaxerxes, his other son, finalized them. It was a significant demonstration of the Persian rulers' efficacy in leveraging the resources of their extensive realm. Materials and artisans were sourced from every empire region. Notably, some Ionian Greeks are documented among the artisans who constructed the palaces and the multitude of laborers. The Persian monarchs constructed palaces to astound guests and demonstrate their immense power and grandeur. Despite their dilapidation, they continue to convey a feeling of magnificence. Democedes, a physician of royal status. Herodotus's narrative of the Persian Wars includes multiple accounts of Greek exiles residing in Persia who sought opportunities to return to their homeland. One of the most peculiar cases pertains to the physician Democedes, the offspring of Caliphon. He originated from the Greek city of Croton in southern Italy, where a prestigious medical school emerged. Herodotus states that after acquiring fundamental knowledge of the medical profession at Croton, Democedes had a dispute with his father and chose to depart from Italy in 526 to seek his fortune. He established himself at Aegina, specializing in a style of medicine that, in contrast to the dominant medical practices of the era, eschewed surgical instruments for cutting and probing. He likely favored manipulation, massage, and topical applications. Democedes received a retainer of 6,000 drachmas from the residents of Aegina after just 1 year due to the success of his skills. The subsequent year he was enticed to Athens by Hippias, the progeny of Pisistratos, who compensated him with 10,000 drachmas. The following year, Polycrates, the tyrant of Samos, remunerated him with 12,000 drachmas to practice there. During his time in Samos, Polycrates was apprehended and executed by the Persian satrap Oroetes, who enslaved the members of Polycrates' family, including Democedes. Oroetes were executed on the orders of King Darius, who perceived the ambitious satrap as a challenge to his authority, resulting in the king acquiring his slaves as property. Subsequently, Darius dislocated his ankle when dismounting from his horse, and the royal physicians, predominantly Egyptians, could not remedy the condition. In desperation, Darius, suffering excruciating pain and crippled by his wounds, consented to treatment by the captive Greek, whom one of his advisors recalled as the former court physician to Polycrates. Democedes reset the king's ankle, resulting in a full recovery. Subsequently, the monarch appointed Democedes to his household and directed all his wives to bestow wealth upon him to preserve the king's life. He also treated the principal wife, Atossa, a daughter of Cyrus the Great, for an abscess on her breast. Democedes could have lived as a revered Persian king's entourage member. The royal storehouses would have supplied him with grain, wine, and other essentials, accommodating and sustaining him at royal expense. While Darius was strategizing to expand his empire westward, Democedes, in gratitude for healing Queen Atossa, managed to secure a position in a reconnaissance mission consisting of 15 Persian nobles. Darius dispatched this group with 2 triremes and a supply vessel to examine the coastlines and harbours of Greece and Italy. Upon completing their tour of Greece, the Persians advanced to the city of Taranto in southern Italy, where Democedes evaded their oversight by informing the authorities that they were royal spies. He returned to Croton from Taranto, pursued by the Persians who attempted to capture him as a fugitive slave of the king. But the inhabitants of Croton opposed them. The Persians returned to Darius only after shipwrecking in the Straits of Otranto. Democedes' narrative exemplifies the oral sagas that Herodotus gathered throughout his journeys throughout the Mediterranean and the Near East. The fundamental outline may be correct, but no additional Democedes records are available. A distinguished physician may have relocated from one Greek city to another and served the Persian monarch, who possessed the means to be far more magnanimous than others. Nevertheless, some information obtained by Herodotus is exceedingly questionable. He asserts that Democedes initially feigned ignorance of his medical expertise to Darius and required coercion through threats of torture to acknowledge any medical knowledge. However, Darius promptly entrusted himself to his care. Queen Atossa allegedly proposed the reconnaissance voyage to Darius in their chamber merely as a favor to Democedes, who sought to return home. These enhancements make the narrative more engaging and substantiate that Herodotus was the father of lies. Demaratus, an exiled Spartan monarch. Even a Spartan might find himself in the service of the Persian king. The Spartan king Demaratus is first introduced in Herodotus's narrative on the invasion of Attica in 506 by a substantial Peloponnesian contingent commanded by both kings. The mission's objective was to dismantle the recently established democratic system of Cleisthenes and reinstate his vanquished rival Isagoras to authority. Demaratus was convinced by certain friends, particularly the Corinthians, that they lacked justification in compelling the Athenians to reinstate an exiled aristocrat and overthrow a regime that had ascended to power by popular support. Demaratus endorsed the Corinthian resolution to retract from the invasion, ultimately leading to its annulment. Consequently, due to the discord between the two monarchs, the Spartans resolved to discontinue joint excursions, stipulating that one king must always remain in Sparta. The incident also ignited a protracted rivalry between the two monarchs. Demaratus filed corruption charges against King Cleomenes about the invasion of Attica, prompting Cleomenes to conspire with Demaratus's cousin, Leotychides, to unseat Demaratus. The justification for this assertion was their contention that Demaratus was not the genuine offspring of his predecessor Ariston. Doubt arose regarding the case due to Demaratus's mother, Ariston's third wife, giving delivery prematurely, leading to doubts about the child's paternity on Ariston's part. In 491, rumors propagated by Cleomenes and Leotychides ultimately compelled the ephors to take action. In times of crisis, the Spartan magistrates typically sought counsel from the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. Cleomenes persuaded the priests of Delphi to provide a fraudulent oracle declaring that Demaratus was illegitimate. Consequently, the ephors removed Demaratus and appointed his cousin in his stead. The king occupies his designated position. Leotychides temporarily maintained Demaratus in a magistracy at Sparta before compelling his departure. He sought asylum with the Persian monarch Darius, who granted him territory and appointed him to his court. He likely undertook this action in anticipation of invading Greece, intending to employ the discontented Greek aristocracy as rulers of the newly acquired regions. Hippias, the formerly tyrant of Athens, was also among the courtiers of Darius. He participated in the expedition of 490, but following the disaster at Marathon, his prospects for reinstatement as king of Athens vanished, and he subsequently died. Herodotus states that Xerxes, the son of Darius, commanded Demaratus to accompany him during his invasion of Greece in 480. Xerxes undoubtedly assured him of reinstatement to his post in Sparta, as a subordinate ruler under the Persian king's authority. Herodotus states that Xerxes sought the counsel of Demaratus multiple times regarding the strength and disposition of the Spartans. In the initial instance, following the passage of the Hellespont, Demaratus, acclimated to the dynamics of the Persian royal court, reportedly inquired whether Xerxes preferred a favorable response or an honest one. When prompted to confess the truth, he asserted that the Spartans would never yield to Xerxes, even if all other Greeks were vanquished, as their principles of independence, duty, and loyalty permitted them to acknowledge no authority other than their own laws, which had proven insurmountable even for Demaratus himself during the second instance at Thermopylae. Demaratus's assertion that the Spartans epitomized bravery and independence among the Greeks and represented Xerxes' most formidable adversaries was met with suspicion. Following the valiant defeat of Leonidas and his Spartan contingent, Xerxes reconsidered his strategy and sought counsel from Demaratus on the most effective means to vanquish the Spartans. The solution involved utilizing his fleet to circumvent the Isthmus of Corinth and assault Sparta via maritime routes. His counsel was dismissed. Nevertheless, with this approach in consideration, Xerxes aimed to annihilate the Greek fleet at Salamis, to prevent any challenge to Persian landings on the Peloponnesian coast. Demaratus never had the opportunity to return to Sparta as Xerxes' marionette sovereign. He likely returned to Persia with Xerxes and resided in exile at the Persian court. His progeny ascended to minor aristocrats in the Persian-dominated region surrounding the Hellespont, where the Athenian historian Xenophon encountered them in the early 4th century. Ironically, the Spartans uncovered Cleomenes' subterfuge with the Delphic oracle, resulting in his dismissal as king. He was compelled to depart from Sparta shortly after Demaratus. He sought assistance from the Arcadians, Sparta's northern neighbors, to restore his position, and the Spartans, albeit grudgingly, permitted his return. Almost quickly, he began to exhibit such violent behavior that his family concluded he had become insane and needed to be restrained. The circumstances surrounding his death, whether it was suicide or homicide by his family, remain ambiguous. His younger brother Leonidas ascended to the throne as king. Demaratus's dialogues with Xerxes are dubious, as Herodotus could not have acquired such intricate details. Yet his banishment to Persia and unsuccessful return are historically substantiated. He was known for being straightforward yet amiable. During a council discussion, an individual inquired whether his silence sprang from ignorance or an inability to articulate, to which he replied, "Certainly, a foolish person would not recognize when to remain silent." The Greeks assault the Persian Empire. The dual triumphs at Plataea and Mycale did not signify the conclusion of the Greek and Persian wars. The Athenians had harbored aspirations of dominating the Hellespont for numerous decades. They became progressively engaged in commerce with the urban centers and tribes of the northern Aegean and Black Sea areas. This commercial motive partially elucidates why Xanthippus and his vessels remained in the Hellespont to seize Sestos. In the subsequent year, 478, Pausanias became leader of the naval forces of the Hellenic League and directed 2 expeditions, the first to Cyprus, resulting in the expulsion of the Persians, and the second to Byzantion, which similarly lost its Persian garrison. Nonetheless, Pausanias harbored personal ambitions, and his authoritarian leadership approach and ostentatious conduct began to alienate his allies. The Spartan ephors endeavored to restrain him. Following a trip to Sparta for a reprimand, he sought to establish himself as a tyrant in Byzantium. Athenian troops led by Cimon, son of Miltiades, thwarted his efforts. He returned to Sparta, but engaged in conflict with the ephors once more, and was compelled to seek sanctuary in a temple. To avert offending the deities, the Spartans refrained from attempting to remove him, opting instead to allow him to perish from starvation. Disenchanted with Spartan authority, the Ionian Greeks now sought assistance from Athens. In 478/77, the island of Delos convened a congress to establish a new alliance. The members vowed to persist in their struggle against the Persians and devastate the king's lands as reparation for their losses. They consented to submit to Athenian authority and to provide warships or financial contributions to a league fund overseen by Athenian officials known as Hellenotamiae, meaning treasurers of the Greeks. The specific number of ships or tribute amounts each island or city was to contribute was determined by Aristodemus, the chief architect of the new alliance. This alliance is referred to by historians as the Delian League due to its treasury being established on Delos. Themistocles had minimal involvement with the new league. However, he convinced the Athenians to enhance the fortifications of their city and its principal port, Piraeus. The Spartans attempted to obstruct this progress, but Themistocles preempted their interference, leading the Athenians to transform their city into the most formidable in Greece. Ultimately, they encircled the entire city, its harbours, and the intervening land with fortification walls. Themistocles fell out of favour, and the Athenian assembly ostracized him in the mid-470s. After a brief period in Argos, he relocated to the Persian court, where the Persian king appointed him as the local governor of Magnesia, where he died in 459. The first major campaign of the Delian League, led by Miltiades' son, Cimon, was against Ion, the final Persian stronghold on the northern coastline of the Aegean. They captured the town in 476. Cimon led the League's forces the following year against a different objective, the island of Skyros, northeast of Euboea. The official reason for conquering this island was that its inhabitants had been practicing piracy against merchants sailing through the area. But this was the excuse to disguise an act of Athenian imperialism. Cimon discovered a huge human skeleton on the island, claimed it was the bones of the Athenian hero Theseus, and returned them to Athens in triumph. Athenians soon settled on Skyros. Another place that felt the growing power of Athens was Charistos on Euboea, which had refused to join the Delian League but was compelled to do so by another Athenian-led military expedition. When Naxos tried to leave the League in 470, she was attacked, forced to surrender her ships, dismantle her walls, and made to pay a monetary tribute. The Delian League was becoming increasingly like an Athenian empire modelled on the Persian one. That is not to say, however, that the Athenians neglected the aim of making war on the Persian king's territory. In 466, Cimon commanded a large fleet of Delian League ships in a campaign along the southwestern coast of Asia Minor to drive the Persians out of the region. The battle at the river Eurymedon in Pamphylia culminated in the destruction of the great king's Phoenician fleet of 200 ships. In 465, Xerxes passed away, and his son Artaxerxes I could not reclaim the territory the Delian League had taken. An Athenian fleet aided another major revolt in Egypt between 459 and 454. But the Persians eventually overcame them and regained control. Soon afterward, Cimon was killed fighting against the Persians in Cyprus, and in 449, a peace treaty known as the Peace of Callias was negotiated between Athens and the Persian king, bringing a halt to their conflicts. By the terms of this treaty, the autonomy of the Ionian Greeks was guaranteed. The Persian king agreed that his ships would not sail westwards beyond the Gelidonia Islands, and that his satraps in Asia Minor would not allow their soldiers to come within a day's ride of the Greek cities on the coast. In return, the Athenians agreed not to wage war against the king's territory. The Peloponnesian conflict. The 440s and 430s marked a period of significant affluence and influence for Athens. In 454, the treasury of the Delian League was relocated to the Athenian Acropolis, Meticulous records were maintained of a tithe of 1/60th of the tribute contributions from the allies, which were allocated to the goddess Athena. Historians have utilized these records and other sources to trace Athens's gradual infringement upon the autonomy of her league allies, whom they began to perceive as subjects of the Athenian Empire. Athens amassed considerable wealth and invested much of it in grand temples and construction projects. The prominent Athenian statesman during this era was Pericles, son of Xanthippos, who famously asserted that Athens was exemplifying a lesson to the rest of the Greeks through the excellence of its citizens and the magnitude of their accomplishments. The expansion of Athenian influence precipitated. Resentment and fear were prevalent among many of the other Greek states. The Ionians found that they had exchanged Persian rule for Athenian, and the Spartans, Corinthians, and Boeotians became alarmed at Athenian attempts to extend their empire in the Aegean, the western Mediterranean, and even on the Greek mainland. Persuaded by inconclusive conflicts, the Spartans led a coalition of Greek allies in a war against the Athenians. This conflict engulfed most of the Greek world, from 431 to 404. Historians called it the Peloponnesian War because most of Sparta's allies were from the Peloponnese. In 413, the Athenians supported a revolt in Caria against the Persian king, Darius II. This brought the Persians into the Peloponnesian War on the side of the Spartans and their allies. In return for financial and military support against Athens, the Spartans agreed to recognize the Persian king's claim to rule the cities and islands of the Ionian Greeks. Essential Histories, 27, describes the war's course, which ended in Athens' defeat. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. The sovereign's tranquility. The triumphant Spartans appropriated much of the Athenian Empire, which led to further hostilities with Persia. In 405/04, Darius II passed away and was succeeded by his eldest son, Artaxerxes II. However, his younger brother, Kairos, who had been instrumental in supporting the Spartans during the Peloponnesian War, harbored resentment and organized a military campaign against Artaxerxes. He sought the aid of Spartan officers who assisted him in enlisting a contingent of 10,000 Greek mercenaries, predominantly from the Peloponnesus. In 401, he advanced his forces into Babylonia and confronted his brother's army at the Battle of Cunaxa. Despite the prowess of his Greek troops, Kairos was slain, compelling the 10,000 Greeks to fight their way out of the Persian Empire to the Hellespont. One participant, an Athenian historian Xenophon, chronicled their expedition in a work titled the Anabasis, signifying the march-up country. The war between Sparta and Persia followed with the Spartan king, Agesilaos, taking up the cause of freedom for the Greeks in an expedition against the western satrapies of Asia Minor in 396. In response, the Persian king supported other Greek states in a war against Sparta. Ironically, the principal Greek ally of the Persians was now Athens. The Athenian general Conon was responsible for the Persian fleet that destroyed the Spartan navy in 394, and removed many Spartan garrisons from the Ionian cities and islands. Conon even utilized the fleet to reconstruct the destroyed Athens fortifications following the Peloponnesian War. The Athenians began to rediscover their own imperial ambitions, however, and in 387/86, a Spartan envoy called Antalcidas was able to negotiate a treaty with the Persian king. Under the terms of this treaty, known as the King's Peace, a general truce was agreed upon between all the Greek states, with limited autonomy for the Ionian Greeks. Thus, the power of the Persian king guaranteed peaceful relations between the Greeks. Conquest ultimately settled the rivalry between the Greeks and the Persians. Alexander the Great invaded the Persian Empire in 334, and in 330, the last of the Achaemenid kings, Darius III, was dead. And Alexander was the new ruler of an empire that, for a brief period, was even larger than that of Darius and Xerxes. Essential Histories, 26, describes these events. The Wars of Alexander the Great.